Folks, it's a 12-game college football season, and just about everybody's played 6 games. So guess what? I have done the math. It took quite a long time, but we figured it out. We are halfway through the season. Wow, time flies, doesn't it? We wait all off season, the longest off season in sports, just to see a college football game. Then the end of August gets here. We start the season, and bam, just like that, we are midway through the season right now. So since I was doing all that math, I felt very academic-minded, and I thought, why don't we hand out some mid-season grades, a mid-season report card for college football teams and players and coaches across the nation. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. We're here discussing the sport we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. Is that a guarantee? No, it's not a guarantee. Best discussion, debate, and analysis, but that's the goal. That's the aim, the mission, and the goal right here at the Voice of College Football. So we do our very best every day to reach that goal, and we will continue to strive for exactly that. And we can reach it based on your engagement, contribution, based on your support right here at the Voice of College Football. So please give me a call and let's talk some college football. So before we get to our mid-season report card, and I want to hear from you, I want your mid-season grades on whatever aspect of college football, whether that's a particular player, a side of the ball for a particular team. Wow, that brings one to mind right out of the gate. There we go. Yes. A coach, a decision, anything that you want to evaluate, anything you want to grade. It's our mid-season report card here at the Voice of College Football. Want to let everyone know that we will be delivering a Michigan-Penn State preview as well as Alabama-Tennessee. I pledge to you at least those 2 game previews are coming, and we've got a ton of content that we've already posted here at the Voice of College Football on the main channel and also all the team channels with Tennessee discussion, Clemson, Texas is coming, Baylor, Michigan, and others. And of course, we've got our full array of live streams, team-specific shows. We've delivered USC on Monday night, of course, with Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. And then Tuesday brings you Iowa and Nebraska. And we've got a full-packed day on Wednesday. Our next show is Oklahoma Live at 12:30 Eastern Time, followed by Michigan, Florida State, and Miami at 5, 6, and 7. Before we get to our calls, of course, the reason we're here on a Tuesday night, first and foremost, is to review your feedback to the top 25 that actually makes sense. Let's get to that first and foremost. Here we go. You ready? I'm the one that should be asking myself if I'm ready. So I've got to say that I've been pleasantly surprised with the complimentary comments that have been pretty much the norm here. So, of course, we're still getting the haters and the critics and the trolls. That's one of the reasons why we've got this little feedback show, little reaction show. And I am welcoming feedback, not just the critics and the trolls. I want to have those fun conversations. So, yes, I am desperately wanting, as you can see from the pinned comment at the top of the screen there, I am desperately wanting people to that are overly critical, calling me an idiot and a moron. I want those people to call because I want interaction from new people. And this is one way to get the engagement and the involvement from some new folks here. I'd like to hear from some critics. But anyone who's got a question or concern or a comment to make that you disagree with the top 25, that's certainly welcome. All right. Not everybody that makes those comments is obviously a critic. You're not going to agree with every spot of every top 25 ranking that I deliver. Of course not. But we've got Butch here that says the fact that we have 3 elimination games in week 7 for the remaining undefeated teams. Yes, this is the first time since 1993, I believe, that we have 3 matchups of at least 5-0, or in this case, all but one 6-0 teams. Charles, thank you so much. Love the channel. Thanks for all you do. Appreciate that. Georgia Reload says Tennessee is no joke, and that's coming from a Georgia fan. Christopher, good to see you. I like your rankings. I don't necessarily agree that they always make sense. Appreciate you being here. Colin, there are a ton of good games this week. There are. David says a great list. Thank you so much for that. Jimmy, thank you, Mark. Clemson and Ohio State are the only 2 teams that have a top 10 win. Yeah, if you look at the old original Associated Press poll, yes, Ohio State has a top 10 win. Jimbo sounded pretty good from 25 up to 2, and then he lost me with Clemson. Okay. Well, if you think about it, Jimbo, if I lost you with Clemson at number 1, then I would have lost you previous to that, because then Clemson should have been ranked somewhere else. Jazzinator, always good for a laugh. So this Jazzinator, of course, you're not going to hear me now. I doubt if you're here, but if you are listening to us right now, please call. I've left the link in the chat. Please call. It'll be a fun discussion. So I say it right there. Jazzinator, yeah, give me a call. Oh, yeah, you won't. You're the joke. Ha! Anything I can do to bait these people to come on, please. Ted, thanks so much for commenting. Unfortunately, if the comments are too long, I'm not going to read through the entire comment. Jazzinator says, calm down, bro. I don't ever catch your live shows, so it would be a little hard to call. Your ranking makes no sense to 90% of college football fans because it's not based on who the best teams are. Okay? So that might be a problem with 90% of the college football fans and not necessarily with me or my ranking system. I also don't agree and don't believe that 90% estimation is accurate from the feedback that we receive. Yes, Elijah, why don't you call him and explain your reasoning? That's all I want to hear. Kevin says, you should embrace your detractors. That's what I'm doing. It's what makes your channel entertaining. It would be boring if it was 100% love fest. Of course not. Of nothing but agreement and Ohio State boot licking. I work the swing shift during the hours of your show. Some people are literally unable to call in. I watch after you post your videos, not live. Yeah, so that's completely understandable. But I've also noted for those people that are unable to watch, and just keep in mind that you can call in and discuss this, not just tonight, but we're live on Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. But I also understand that you may not have the opportunity, but don't just call me a moron and then to move on. You can at least explain yourself in the comment. Penn State, Michigan, looking forward to that. BJ Bartlett, thanks, Mark. Go Bruins. Mike says this mostly makes sense. Won't quibble over a spot or two. Mark, in my opinion, just ditched the first few weeks of polls. Nathan, appreciate you being here. James jumps on board as well. He had an argument over Clemson and Ohio State. We went back and forth on that. Let's see, James. Clemson escaped with their lives against a very questionable opponent that could have ruined their season 2 weeks ago. Well, Wake Forest is not a questionable opponent. And Matt says, yeah, I'm just not seeing how Clemson could be ranked number 1. They did beat 2 decent teams in Wake Forest and NC State. That must be it. They also struggled with Wofford. Okay. My response, name me a team that has better wins than NC State, Wake, Georgia Tech, Boston College. And I'm not touting, especially the last 2 as being quality wins, but I'm just saying that they are Power 5 wins, and add those to the list of other wins. And I think I can bring most of you over to my side on this one. Uncle Rico's here. Look at that. All right. We've got enough people lining up for the calls that we'll start to get to some of these callers. Appreciate everybody being here. All right, first and foremost, let's hit the line with we got who is this on the line? Hello, hello. Welcome into the voice of college football. Going once, going twice. Sorry, out. All right, next up, I believe we got DeAndre on the line. DeAndre, what's going on?
What's up, Mark? How you doing, man?
Got a good look at your kitchen there.
Well, yeah, my house being built, so this ain't at my grandma's place.
Okay. How's Grandma doing?
Oh, she passed away, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
January. No, it's all good. She's happy. But
that's a good way to look at it.
Clemson, being on one of your rankings, and we got cut off when we were having this conversation last week. Somebody said that Wake Forest and NC State this week. Go look at Michigan's schedule. Michigan has not hardly played anybody that good. Connecticut, I think they're having a pretty good year right now. Hawaii and Colorado State are probably the worst two teams in college football. They struggle with Indiana, who's a decent team. But Clemson's, I can look at it and say they're not the best team by eyesight, but by resume, they are the best team currently. So that's what I'll go by with Clemson. Ohio State, opponents are 17-18. Yeah, and I totally agree with that too. Wisconsin has fired their head coach. I'm not gonna keep you too long, Mark, but I saw something funny. Think about if Georgia Tech beats Virginia this coming up weekend. Georgia Tech has a chance to win the ACC Coastal. Isn't that amazing?
I love it. I love it.
Excuse me. Yeah, I just saw that.
I know they got wins against Pitt and Duke the last 2 weeks, and
yes. And we're going to see some of these other schools beat each other up. And Miami has a hard toe because they still got to play Clemson or Florida State. So that might knock them out. So you might have Georgia Tech. And I'm a big fan of Collins. I think he was at a hard turn, but I guess I might be wrong if they went out and make it to the ACC championship game versus Clemson. It looks like, and Syracuse, man, is doing an amazing job too. Me and Jordan was talking about this, and he doesn't want to blame Tony Elliott, but Brandon Arshaw has fallen off. GJ's gotten better, and the two guys that was with Brandon Arshaw has made the Syracuse quarterback look really, really good. So I'm kind of amazed by what's going on in college football right now with Syracuse. I mean, them in Kansas got to be stories that you love right now for what they possibly could have done. Mark wants to justify for Clemson at number one. You lost me there. Like I said, all you gotta do is look at the resume and who they played. I don't understand why people have a hard time feeling that. Texas, Alabama, I know they lost their quarterback. They did struggle with Texas A&M, who's not having a great year. So I mean, go look two teams on your team that are ranked. The Louisiana Tech is turning around too, and Clemson beat Furman and not Wofford. Somebody not looking at the schedule, so that's why I said they have a problem. Furman is one of the top non-buzz subdivision schools out there. So I don't know what some of them complaining about. I don't know who Georgia has played this year so far.
And DeAndre, I tend to dismiss or undervalue some of those games a little bit against the FCS teams, unless let's say Clemson would have really legitimately struggled and won the game by 10 points. Let's say if they would have legitimately been challenged, then I would grade them down for that. But I'm not going to split hairs between winning that game. What was it was like 35-12 versus if they would have won it 52-10. I'm not going to. they didn't struggle. Yes, they were working through their offense and they had some issues, but they didn't necessarily struggle with Furman. They were in no way, shape, or form challenged in any way in regards to being pushed for a win or a loss in that game.
They're like, this guy says Cincinnati should be on your top 2, but Cincinnati has a loss. I think everybody in your rankings doesn't have a loss in their top 5. I
Who
just looking
says
at
that Cincinnati? Somebody says that Cincinnati.
Illinois lost to Indiana. George Mason lost for that loss. Cincinnati should be in your top 2. I'm like, no.
Well, that might be top 25. That
probably
got cut off. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But Mark, I ain't gonna hold you up too long because I'll let everybody else get a chance to talk. You have a great night, man.
Thanks, DeAndre.
How you like the line opening? 4.5. How did you like that line? You think that's a good line?
Are you talking about the Florida State
Clemson,
game?
Yeah, Florida State Clemson.
4.5.
I think you started off too low.
At home, I would tend to take Clemson.
Yeah, no, I know everybody's gonna take Clemson, but I'm just talking about, are you surprised how low it opened up at 4.5?
Well, I talked to Jason today. I don't know if we've posted those videos yet, but Jason and I recorded today, and he said that it opened at about 7.5, and then it just dropped.
Yeah, I think Breezy's gonna be playing. I think people still don't trust DJ, but think about it. If Clemson gets through this game in Syracuse, outside of maybe Notre Dame at home, it's pretty much gonna be smooth cakewalk the way teams look currently. But all right, Mark, you take care, man.
Thanks, DeAndre. Guess we'll see you on Saturday night.
All right. Bye.
Sounds good.
Yes, sir. You will see me Friday too. All right.
Awesome. Got our guy DeAndre, and what he's referring to is Clemson Preview on Friday night. So DeAndre and Edward and Jordan Bowman jump on Friday night to deliver a Clemson live preview over on the Clemson channel. So check that out. And then they're live after the ball game on Saturday. And of course, it's an ABC primetime game with Clemson taking on Florida State in Tallahassee. All right, Ferris, good to see you. Dependent Fanatic, look at all those Michigan fans. Wow, we are flooded with Michigan fans here at the Voice of College Football. And hey, it's a good thing. Team Savage, what's going on tonight? Texas Savage, what's going on tonight?
Not much. What's your score prediction for the Texas game this weekend?
Well, I don't really give my predictions here on a Tuesday night. I haven't even thought about any of those games, so I got no score. I'll give you a score prediction. It's not going to be my final prediction, which I have for our fine folks on Patreon, but Texas score prediction. Where's the game against Iowa State?
Texas.
Oh, they're playing at home against Iowa State. I'm going to say Texas wins that game 27-16.
Okay. How about Clemson, Florida State?
Iowa State likes to slow it down. Again, everybody, my picks are on Patreon. These don't count. I did go 15-7 against the spread last weekend, so Clemson, Florida State. I'm going to go Clemson wins that one 30-17.
Do you think Steve Sarkisian's still on the hot seat?
No. Now that could change in 2 weeks. He could lose to Iowa State and whatever the next game is and suddenly be on the hot seat. But this is his second season. I think he's pretty safe. They're definitely improved. There's no question that Texas is a really good football team.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened in the fourth quarter against Texas Tech. I didn't see a lot of that game. I saw some of it. I watched every play of the Alabama game. I saw some of the West Virginia game. And, that Oklahoma game, I didn't even start to watch that game, and it was out of hand. So there was no reason with all the other good games. But obviously, people are going to dismiss what they did to Oklahoma last weekend. And sure, Oklahoma's got some serious problems. There's no question about that. But 49-0 against a team with Oklahoma's talent. Texas is starting to put it together.
Do you think Texas can win the Big 12?
Yes, they can. I don't think they're the best team right now, but I would not be surprised in any way. I think Oklahoma State's the best team right now, but I can't wait for that game. When is Oklahoma State? When is that game against?
22nd. I'm going to it.
Oh, that's next week. Okay. All right, you're going.
Yep.
Where are they playing this year?
Stillwater.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that is sizing up as one of the games of the year in the conference. Sure.
Yep. Well, I'll let you go, Mark.
Well, I
Hook 'em
appreciate you being
horns.
here, Texas Savage.
You're welcome.
Enjoy
Bye.
the ball games this weekend.
You too. Bye.
All right, folks. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. We're here for the next few hours talking the game we all love with all of you. Appreciate you all being here. And again, we are going to deliver a Tennessee-Alabama preview as well as Penn State and Michigan. And we've got a lot of great conversations that have yet to be released with Tennessee, Clemson, Michigan, Baylor, Texas, and others. And then, of course, our plethora of live streams. All right. The line has suddenly cleared, so I will leave the link in the chat. There you go. And let's see. I would love to hear from some of these people that want to talk about the top 25 that actually makes sense. We got Mike Ford kind of wondering how Penn State is ahead of us, if there's a quality win there. I don't see it unless you think squeaking one against Purdue is something to hang your hat on. I actually do. I think that's a better win than anything that Michigan has right now. Purdue just went to College Park and beat Maryland. That might be Michigan's best win, beating Maryland. It probably is Michigan's best win. And Purdue beat Maryland. Purdue's a better team than anybody that Michigan has faced, and Penn State went on the road and won at Purdue. So that's part of it. Absolutely. Let's also understand, Mike, that I believe those two teams are like 6 and 8 in my rankings. That's like nothing. At this point in the season, you understand, so everybody should understand that the distance between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, they're not all equidistant. They're not perfectly slotted like that. 1, 2, and 3 could be basically nothing. There could be no difference between the three, but I have to make a distinction. And then there could be a drop-off, and there could be 4. There could be a drop-off, and there could be 5. Then there could be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The next 8 could be. Not all the spots are created equal. That only makes sense. Mid-grade, I would love for mid-grade to call sometime. Mid-grade, if you can hear me, if you watch any of the other videos and you can hear me, or if you're listening to this currently, please call. I would love for you to explain yourself about the real AP ranking. So you don't have to emphasize real. You don't have to put that in there. It's just the AP ranking. It's not the real one. So I'm not proposing that this is the AP ranking. If I was doing that, then you could call the AP ranking the real AP ranking. But there's only one AP ranking. Oh, and it makes the most sense, really. I thought about doing this week, is going through each AP ranking each week and coaches poll, because this is what determined and became the creation of the top 25 that actually makes sense, is that I used to post videos where I would tear them to shreds every week to explain why they didn't make sense. And that doesn't mean every week doesn't make sense, but too frequently the rankings do not make sense. They either just flat out don't make sense. For example, this season, after Washington bludgeoned Michigan State. They were still ranked below Michigan State. That doesn't make sense. So sometimes it just clearly did not make sense. Other times it was, well, this team's not justified this ranking yet. It doesn't mean that they've not justified it, but they have not had an opportunity to justify the ranking. So why are they ranked in this position? And you know what the answer always is because in the preseason, they were supposed to be that good. Case in point, Oklahoma State, through 3 weeks of the season, had defeated Central Michigan 58-44. That's inconsequential. Beat an FCS team. I don't even remember who. Nobody any good. And they beat Arizona State in fairly unimpressive fashion, a bad Arizona State team, by 17 points. A game that was a one-score game in the fourth quarter. That was Oklahoma State's 3 wins at that point in the season. What was Oklahoma State ranked? Number 8 in the country, off of beating Arizona State by a couple scores, Central Michigan by a couple scores, and an FCS team. Oklahoma State was ranked 8th in the country. We could take any year, almost any year over the last decade, and take Oklahoma State, give them those 3 wins, and they wouldn't even be in the top 25. Do you know why? Because they started the season unranked or 21st or 23rd or something in that range. But since they are highly regarded in the offseason, then wins against Arizona State and Central Michigan warrant a number 8 ranking, which, of course, it doesn't. Doesn't make sense. All right, we're going to wrap up the top 25 discussion unless anybody else has anything for us. And I'm going to get to our midseason report card. And I would love to hear from all of you on your midseason report cards. Of course, you can call about anything relating to college football. But our topic for the night, in addition to the top 25 that actually makes sense reaction, would be midseason grades, because we played 6 games. Just about everybody in the country. We've got some outliers like Ole Miss with 5 games, and Minnesota's 4-1 right now. But almost everybody's played 6 games at this point. So we're going to hand out some mid-season grades. So I've got to hand it to all of you that most of these comments are either reasonable criticism, which we invite, we welcome reasonable criticism, or they are complimentary, one or the other. Very few just are too bad this week. All right. This person, account 22, says these don't even make sense from a resume standpoint. And then our guy J-Dub chimes in with who's the correct top 5 based on resume. Then I respond that, that always brings silence. Patrick N., Clemson number 1 is asinine. Okay. Please explain what plagues me is being asinine. Patrick N., I can't do any better than that. So please enlighten me, Patrick N. Yes, Patrick N., I look forward to your call. Which will never come, unfortunately. And let's be clear here. As we go to Michael here in just a second, let's be clear. I don't think Clemson is the best team in the country. Not based on what I've seen. That doesn't mean that they don't have the talent, the ability, and certainly the coaching to get there and win a national championship. If somebody told me today Clemson is going to win the national championship this year, I would be a little bit surprised. I do think that Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State trio, it's going to be difficult for anyone to get past those three. But if it's going to be anybody, I'll go Clemson first and Michigan second. Then once we get past those five, wow. Who would you take after those five? I guess I'm looking at Tennessee or USC. And USC, I don't think, is ready for that kind of competition. But if we're going to get past those top five, then USC has the stars on offense and capability. And they've shown themselves good enough on defense in spots to make plays and create turnovers. That's it pretty much, Ferris. You got me down. Mark cashing out his cigarette, a swish of whiskey, and he's ready to go. All right. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Michael's on the line. How you doing, Michael?
I'm hanging in there for Tuesday. And yourself, sir?
I am doing just fine. I appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks for letting me be on. Hey, for the most part, I agree with it. But the thing I'm trying to figure out is why is it it's being punished for being robbed against the IU game? Because I feel they should be ranked higher than where they're at right now.
So I believe they're 24th in the AP, which the only reason I know that is I watched Brett Bielema's news conference yesterday. So is that correct? Mm-hmm. Number 24?
Yes, sir.
And I've got Illinois about 16, 17, something like that.
That's what I'm thinking. Or do you think they should be a little bit higher, being that they should be they got robbed?
Well, I of course think that they should be exactly where I placed them, because that's the reason I placed them where I placed them. Mm-hmm. So I took that into consideration, but they did lose the game. So you're telling me that in your mind there is no question that the officials blew that game and Illinois would have won.
Yeah, because that was a touchdown. I don't know if you watched the game or not, though.
Well, I watched the game. I don't recall it right now.
Because that was clearly a touchdown, because they signaled it a touchdown on the field, but the replay overturned it. And stuff like that. But no, they got a tough game this week with Minnesota and stuff. Is that maybe one of your top 5 games?
Oh, I would think so. Top 5 games this week. I'm going to go Alabama, Tennessee, Penn State, Michigan. Then, yeah, this Minnesota-Illinois game, that in addition to your Boilers beating Minnesota, is the next big game in that division. There's a lot of big games in that division until 2 or 3 teams kind of sort themselves out as being the team, or maybe one team. Mm-hmm. I doubt it. All these games between pretty much everybody, excluding Northwestern, are just really important games.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about I would think Oklahoma State, TCU would be on the top 5, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah.
And then I'm trying to think, who was it? There's a good game out of the Pac-12 this weekend. I can't remember who it is.
We've got USC and Utah, and we've got UCLA, Oregon.
Which one do you think is the better one? Going to be UCLA, Oregon? I got a feeling Utah's going to get smoked.
Oh, okay. For some reason, yeah, I'm intrigued by UCLA and how well they've played the last couple of games. And obviously they just took care of Utah. So I would watch UCLA and Oregon over the other game.
Mm-hmm. But one thing I was going to do, because you did last thing, and I'm going to let you go after this one, is you actually did live stream games. Are you going to start doing that in here in the next few weeks?
Oh, I'm sorry. I did what?
You were on live streaming during.
Oh, we would do a watch party.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you and everybody else in the chat if you guys would do this. If I started a live stream, let's say during the Michigan-Penn State game at noon, but I wasn't on, okay? We just live streamed. I put up a graphic, and it gave everybody a platform to chat during the game. Would people want that?
Didn't you do that a couple times last year?
I only did that with me on the game, during the game, talking to all of you. I'm talking about I'm not on, and you guys are just watching whatever games you wanted to watch. I wouldn't pin it down to any particular game because you guys can watch whatever games you want, but that the chat would be going for you guys to be able to talk to each other during the game.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of people from what I'm reading right now in the chat. A lot of people will probably be interested in doing it. Then at halftime, you can give us your thoughts. Be the Paul Harvey.
Paul Harvey, love it.
You know, not bad. I was just wondering, just something I was going to throw out.
How about these Boilers with 2 wins now the last 2 weeks? These 2 games the last 2 weekends are huge wins for them.
That's true and stuff like that. I agree with what you said about Maccabee, and normally he wouldn't be, but the reason why he has been started is because King Drew's still hurt.
Sure.
And stuff like that. But
I understand.
As Coach Baum said in the press conference yesterday, they didn't need to run the ball last week against Maryland. Now this week, most likely they might. We just don't know yet. It's going to happen. But no, another thing. Do you think they covered the 14 against Nebraska?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty tall order. I'm confident that they're going to win the game, but Nebraska tends to keep these games pretty close. And Purdue has obviously not blown out anyone outside the FCS. So I would lean toward taking those points. Michael, you still with us?
Yeah, the internet monitor
okay.
hit me up. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, but back to what I was saying about the spread. I think Purdue won, but something tells me unless they get up to big lead early, I don't think they covered the 14.
Yeah, I tend to think that that's a little sizable. Yeah, a little much.
Yeah, not bad. All right, it's always a great show, Mark. Thanks for letting me be a part of it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate you being here. Have a good night. Whoa, Nelly. Welcome into the Voice of College Football.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be here. I had a specific pair of teams ranking question. Teams that'll face off late in the year. USC and UCLA.
Yeah.
Aren't UCLA's last 2 wins better than anything USC has done this year?
Certainly the last one is, for sure. Now, the Washington win has taken a bit of a hit with the loss to Arizona State. And the Michigan State win, of course, for Washington is pretty much non-existent at this point. So our evaluation of Washington has gone downhill. Where Utah, looking at USC, the Fresno State game, admittedly, is not nearly what we thought. The Oregon State win is a decent win on the road, but they really only had the one game where they were challenged, and that would be the game in Corvallis. They ran away from Washington State last week. It was a really good game for the first half plus. But that's a ranking for me in totality. So meaning the depth of, let me call up all these USC games. I could run them off the top of my head. I should be able to. But when you look at, they crush Rice. They blow out Stanford. And of course, Stanford's awful. Fresno State was an easy win. Oregon State, again, challenged on the road. The Arizona State, hey, they just beat Washington. So, and the Washington State. So if we were going to rank wins, the Utah win is by far the best win. That was a very impressive win. If we're going to go to a second win on the board, then we're going to go to Washington State, the USC win over Washington State. Then we're going to squabble about whether the next one would be the Oregon State game or the Washington game. So USC beating Oregon State or UCLA beating Washington. But then after that, the rest of the USC schedule is pretty far superior to UCLA's.
And I think UCLA had the worst game. Still a win, but a close win over South Alabama is not anywhere near
Yeah.
a close win in Corvallis. No matter how bad Oregon State seems to be, it's not an easy out at home for them.
So I understand your point.
I had another question, more philosophical one. Looking at Kansas State and Tulane, obviously I think the head-to-head gives Tulane the advantage there.
Yeah.
But, looking ahead, Kansas State's wins are mostly P5. Tulane's wins are going to mostly be G5. Sure. At right now, like, 3 or 4 samples, that makes sense. But down the line, I mean, is there a point where those P5 wins or even losses, let's say they both go 8-4 or 9-3.
Yep.
What point down the line does that head-to-head kind of take a back seat?
No, it's a great question. It is a great question because I am all about deciding things on the field. And so when two teams play, as long as they maintain the same records, at least the same records, then my tendency is to say, I will always argue that the team that won the game head-to-head should be ranked higher, and they are, in a sense, they have proven to be the better team. So, for example, Oregon beat Ohio State last year. That was Ohio State's first loss. Oregon didn't lose a game for a while. So for a couple weeks, Oregon didn't even have a loss. And then once they lost a game, of course, they lost to a bad Stanford team, but they still only had one loss and had the same record as Ohio State. And it wasn't until late in the season that Oregon got the second loss against Utah. So for all that time, I thought it was justifiable to rank Oregon ahead of Ohio State, although I believed that Ohio State was a better team. And by week 10, week 11, at whatever point before Oregon lost, that Ohio State had built a better resume. Right. So the scenario that you bring up is even more egregious because you're talking about a Power 5 in a solid conference versus a group of 5 in probably the 6th best conference in college football, and it's not close to the other 5. So ever since I started this, I have been able to maintain those head-to-heads unless there's a situation where you can't get around it because Arkansas beat Mississippi State and Mississippi State beat Ole Miss, but Ole Miss beat Arkansas, and you have this A versus B versus C, and you can't, you've got that type situation, so you can't keep it in line for every game. But with this Tulane situation, you're right. So however long I've been doing this, I have held firm with the head-to-head because I've been able to get around issues involving the head-to-head. But this is the first time that actually, up until Tulane winning this last game, and because of some other things that happened, I actually ranked Tulane behind Kansas State the week before because Kansas State posted another quality win. Because what happened was I can't justify how it affects a bunch of other teams. So if it was only those two teams playing, and let's say Kansas State had a really difficult schedule and they stayed with one loss the entire season, and Tulane stayed with one loss, even though they played a much easier schedule, I could justify keeping Tulane ahead of Kansas State. But we don't just rank two teams. They're not just in their own vacuum. By keeping Tulane above Kansas State, it's manipulating in an invalid way my rankings for a bunch of other teams. So I had to kind of break my rule and say, this is impacting a bunch of other teams, and it's not correct. If you follow my line of thinking there.
Yeah, like the many data points are going to overtake the one, even though the one might be quite large.
Yeah, if I've got to have Kansas State, let's say, in front of a line of teams in the Big 12, let's say 3 or 4 weeks from now, that include Baylor and TCU or Oklahoma State or Kansas, and Tulane continues to beat Navy and Tulsa and whomever, then I've got to place Tulane ahead of Kansas and TCU and all those teams, even though they may not justify that based on their schedule.
Okay,
So, yeah, I try to keep the head-to-head, and I've been able to do that for like 5 years, but this is one case in which it doesn't appear as though I'm going to be able to keep that going. It just impacts other teams.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a good explanation. I hadn't thought about it that way. I just had thought about each Tulane win would be less impressive than each KSU win, and each loss would be more damning. But
and even if they were the only two that we ranked,
right,
there would be an argument on your side that even though they played once and Tulane won the game, that if Kansas State ran through the Big 12 and beat everyone, and Tulane did the same thing in the American, that their resumes just are not comparable. Yep.
Right. All right. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for the call. Appreciate that. All right, folks, we're here every Tuesday night to run through the top 25 that actually makes sense. And also, I've got a bit of a report card since it is mid-season here. It's the semester break in college football. So if you've got any report card grades for anybody out there, player, coach, team, unit, Iowa offense, I've made quite a list here, and I'll be revealing my grades for a number of teams in college football. Uncle Rico, look at this. I've not been able to sleep since you released your top 25, Mark. I am completely beside myself with anger, and nothing you say will change my mind. And, of course, Uncle Rico has never stated anything that he did not fully believe in, was not fully convicted in, and was satirical in any sort of way. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. What do we have? McD on the line.
Mark, you hear me?
I got you.
Good. Mark, so I'm more here to talk about the report card grades for a few teams and a few coaches.
Okay.
Than your top 25, because I always think your top 25 makes sense for the most part. I mean, I might have a minor disagreement here and there, but
absolutely.
I know what you're trying to do.
The top 25 for quite a few years now.
Mm-hmm. But I want to talk about the Maryland Terps and how they got robbed against Purdue for a chance to get that game into overtime. I'm not saying they would have won the game. I'm not here saying that the refs cost us the game or anything.
Yep.
They definitely cost us a chance to compete in overtime, though.
Okay. I was watching the game.
That offsides call on that non-offsides call on that extra point kick that was blocked. Yeah. So the way I'm sure you know this, the way the referees ref games is that they look at a quadrants of the field. So a ref is assigned that side of the line. I'm absolutely serious when I say this. Whichever referee was supposed to watch that side of the line should be fired for that missed call. That is the most egregious. I'm not saying this as a Terps fan. I'm saying this as a football fan. That is the most egregious miss I've ever seen.
Here. Okay. That's your opinion. Okay. Immediate firing for the missed offside call. Got it.
I mean, Maryland got robbed of a chance to play to at least get that game to overtime. And I'm just saying this as a football fan as well. I've never seen an ineligible receiver downfield get called on a 2-point try. Maybe that's just me never seeing that before. I don't know. But I just want to throw that out there as well.
Okay, those are both interesting observations because, I'm watching the game, and as soon as I saw the replay, I thought, that dude is offsides. It's pretty obvious. He jumped. Now, of course, I heard Jeff Brom's news conference, and of course, he said, he got a really quick jump and he was right on the ball. And of course he's going to say that.
Yeah.
I didn't think that there was any question that he was offsides. And so that's one right there. And then when you talk about the ineligible lineman downfield, okay, they're setting up at the 2.5 yard line for a 2-point conversion, correct? They're at the 2.5. So they're allowed to go down the field at 1 yard. I would have to watch the play again, but I just cannot imagine. Again, this comes down to context for officials. Like, understand where we are in the game. If this is, the second quarter and we're in the middle of a long game and it's 15-14, go ahead and call it. Let them know, okay, he technically went too far. He was too far downfield. So you'll be watching that and be, guarding against that the next time. But to decide the game, I think there has to be a judgment made there. Was he, because basically that rule's in play, so linemen can't go downfield and be blocking ahead of receivers that are, you can't just dump off a 3-yard pass to a receiver and have linemen get out there, and then it becomes, that no one would be tackling anybody because these linemen would clear the way. And, we'd have scoring plays every 3 plays. So that's what it's for. And again, if you're going to go by the letter of the law in the second quarter, great. Back up the rule book and call the rules as they're stated. But in a game deciding situation, I think that the officials should have more awareness of the situation and allowing the players and the coaches to decide the game.
I agree. And I saw it. They showed the replay. He was about maybe 2 yards into the end zone.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, but I've never seen that called on a 2-point try. That's all I'm saying about that. I don't think. I get it if he's if it's a normal, I don't know, first and goal at the 5 type ordeal. But I just never seen that called on a 2-point try like that in college or NFL. But maybe it has. I don't know. Okay. But I do want to give Purdue credit. I'll admit I was not really high on them. I wasn't really buying the hype. Going on the road and being a Minnesota team that I still think is a top 25 team.
Yep.
And a Maryland Terps team that I think is a borderline top 25 team, is pretty impressive in back-to-back games like that. I can't deny that. So I give Purdue credit for coming into College Park and beating us. So enough of the Maryland game. They should win their next 2 against Indiana and Northwestern. If they don't go on the road and beat Indiana, I'm going to be livid. But they should win both of those games. But a few report card grades, Mark, that I want to give out.
Okay.
I want to give an A to 2 coaches. I want to give an A to Chip Kelly. And with the job he's doing at UCLA, I did not see this coming at all. He deserves credit for that. The second A I want to give to is Brian Harsin. And you might be thinking, why would I give Brian Harsin an A? Unless I missed it, does he still have his job at Auburn?
He still has his job. I am shocked by I could have sat here for a half hour guessing coaches that would receive an A, and I wouldn't have made my way to Brian Harsin.
For him to keep his, it looks like they're going to keep him through this next. I don't know if it's a bye week this week for Auburn. I think they play. Don't they play?
Ole Miss.
They play. I thought Ole Miss played. Never mind. That was next week. They play LSU. I give Brian Harsin an A for keeping his job because after that beat down by Georgia in that embarrassing second half that they played against Georgia in. So I will give Brian Harsin an A for keeping his job after that, because I thought for sure he was going to get fired someday. So
okay, Brian Harsin gets an A for the administration failing to fire him. Okay.
Yep. Teams I want to give an A. Kansas. I don't care. I know the quarterback's out for the year for Kansas. I still think they'll go bowling, but they're probably going to lose the majority of their games down the stretch. But hey, you got College game day to show up, and you basically have a season to remember for Kansas. This is a great year for Kansas. It sucks that the quarterback got injured, but that head coach, if I'm that head coach, his name is escaping me. I might just Lance Leipold, that's his name. I might just want to stay in Kansas. I mean, if you think about it, the big boys are leaving, the quote unquote big boys. I know Texas is looking good right now, but Oklahoma is we'll get an F from me at this point. But I know that I would stay at Kansas if I was him. I think he could do some things at Kansas that hasn't been done in a very long time. But I think that this is a season to remember for Kansas. I also want to give Tennessee an A as well. Tennessee, I think it's the first team, and I don't know since when, to have College game day come to their university twice in a season. So they get an A for that.
Okay, Tennessee, Kansas, and UCLA with A's.
Now, my Maryland Terps will receive a B.
Okay.
Because I expect them to only have one loss until this point, and they have two. So
I can go with that.
But yeah, I'm excited to see. Basically, I'm not going to give anybody Fs, even though I kind of just said Oklahoma deserves an F. But there's plenty of other teams that I could give a lot of grades. I could be here all night, but I'm sure you have other calls to get to. But I just want to leave off with saying I can't wait for this upcoming week for college football. There's a lot of big games. I know my Terps play Indiana, and but even then, I mean, that's kind of a big game for both of those teams because their season, them possibly being teams that could go win 7-8 games, will be on the line. But a lot of big games, a lot of top 25 matchups. Even some non-top 25 matchup games are big games, in my opinion, but I cannot wait for week 7. I know you will be covering it, Mark, from 9 a.m. from College game day until the last snap gets taken in the Pac-12 Mountain West at 2 a.m. or 2:30 a.m., whenever that is. So, yeah, just want to come on here, give you an update about the Terps, give you some letter grades, and thanks for taking my call, Mark. We're going to beat Indiana. Go Terps.
Appreciate you being here, man. Welcome in, everyone, to the Voice of College Football. And I'm going to run down a few teams, players, and coaches that I would give a midseason report card to. Ferris, appreciate you being here. Of course, Michigan fan Ferris. Thanks for the contribution, sir. You still have Michigan under on 10 wins, 9-3. I did not pick Michigan to go 9-3, Ferris. I picked them to go 10-2. So look up the video. We had Michigan at 10-2. All right. Next up here at the Voice of College Football, we've got Cole Varks. What's going on?
Hey there, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Appreciate you calling.
Yeah, good to hear it. So, going back to the top 25 thing, I make my own one each week. I kind of, just go through, kind of rank the teams. No focus on it. I just list teams 1 through 25. So I wanted to share that, and I wanted you to give a turn, because I do just whip this up real quick. I want to see, what I could do better and what you think.
Okay.
I want you to have a chance to criticize the viewers' top 25.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this real quick before you start. What are you basing this on?
So this is kind of just a collection of really everything. So
Okay.
I value resume a lot, but also projections matter too to me.
Okay.
I feel like you still need to have the teams that have proven themselves and that we know that are going to be good at the top.
All right.
So here we go. Number 1, Ohio State. 2, Georgia. 3, Alabama. 4, Clemson. 5 Tennessee, 6 Michigan, 7 USC, 8 Oklahoma State, 9 Penn State, 10 Ole Miss, 11 TCU, 12 UCLA, 13 Wake Forest, 14 NC State, 15 Oregon, 16 Texas, 17 Syracuse, 18 Mississippi State, 19 Kansas, 20 Cincinnati, 21 Illinois, 22 Tulane, 23 Kansas State, 24 Florida State, 25 James Madison, and then my 5 honorable mentions in order: 26 UNC, 27 Notre Dame, 28 Kentucky, 29 Purdue, and 30 Utah.
Well, I got to say, I'm not really finding much wrong with your top 25. I would ask this. Are you moving Tulane into the top 25 just because of the Kansas State game?
Yeah, I believe here, if I look up their schedule, so that's definitely like a big part of it, obviously, because that's their one big win on the road. But I mean, the rest of they beat Houston, they beat ECU this weekend, who had a close game against NC State. They beat Alcorn State and UMass soundly, as they should. They did lose to Southern Miss, who isn't a great team, but I feel like the Houston game, the ECU game, or the Kansas State game kind of beat that out a bit. So I think they're definitely still deserving of a top 25 spot, all things considered.
Well, you basically have a ranking system that is going to be pretty agreeable to most people because you base it on the results, but you're also, as you say, you're projecting or you're slotting some of the teams that people are familiar with and believe are really the best teams. You're giving them the benefit of the doubt, unless they've screwed it up, of course. If they've lost games, that's one thing, but you're bypassing the resume with some teams like an Ohio State and others because of their dominance and their reputation and what we expect of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just, I feel like I do a pretty good job considering everything. I just, it sometimes boggles my mind how people can be so upset with your top 25 when it's got a specific, like, you're not saying those are the top 25 best teams in order. It's, you're saying, like, based on what we've seen, these are the top 25 teams. And I agree with not having Utah ranked. Their best win is Oregon State, I think. That's they're 4-2. They don't really deserve to have a rank.
Is Utah still ranked by the AP?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, this is I don't I don't know what this is possibly based on.
Yeah, they're number 20.
Yeah,
they're somehow above the likes of Illinois, Texas. I don't get it.
Their best win is,
Oregon.
as you said, it's probably Oregon State, and that win is starting to somewhat be questioned.
Yeah. One question. Well, I have a few other things I want to address. Who would you say is the favorite to go be the Group of 5 representative in the New Year's 6?
Yeah, I would go do Cincinnati and UCF. Of course, they would play in a conference championship game, but
I believe they play in the regular season.
Okay, they also play in the regular season because I like what I've seen out of UCF. If I'm just obviously taking the records, but I'm also trying to apply what I've seen out of these teams.
They play in Orlando, by the way.
Is that UCF's playing extremely well. And then, the two obvious conferences to go to are the American and the Mountain West, even though the Mountain West is down this year. And really, there's nobody there. San Jose State would be the only team with one loss left. So it's going to be difficult for them to make it all the way through. So it looks like it's a race between Cincinnati, Tulane, and UCF. And of course, we got the 2 undefeated teams out of the Sun Belt. But
I
of
think
course, Madison's ineligible. But
yeah, so James Madison to me may look like the best group of 5 teams so far. I think they rival Cincinnati. The issue obviously is they can't go to anything. Do you think there's any way that the NCAA like makes an exception or like changes the rule mid-season if JMU goes undefeated and crushes their opponents the rest of the way and is obviously the best G5 team?
Well, I would not be against that. I don't see it happening, and I would have to have somebody explain to me why that rule even exists.
Yeah.
If the school has done nothing wrong, the program's done nothing wrong, we're not talking about some kind of probation type situation. They have met the qualifications to be lifted up into FBS play. Why can't they be eligible immediately for bowl play? I don't get that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the reasoning behind it either. I think it's stupid, but a couple other things I want to bring up. One, with the Jalen Daniels situation, I believe I saw on Twitter from his Twitter account, he retweeted that report and kind of called it into question, saying that was news to him. So, according to him, he's still doing fine. We'll see how that ends up. But, I thought that was an important thing to mention. Who knows if he'll play on Saturday against OU, but it sounds like he may not be out for the season, as some people are saying. Then I wanted to ask you about, I don't know if you heard this, but Kennesaw State is rumored to be joining the Conference USA. What do you think about the Conference USA just trying to stitch together some sort of competitive conference?
Well, they at least had the foresight a long, long time ago to name themselves Conference USA, and they did that at the point in which they, became pretty obvious that they were just going to be grabbing schools from all over the country. And so that's pretty much continued, even though they're pretty well relegated to the South for the most part. I know nothing about Kennesaw State, but I think that these lower conferences, as we've seen kind of reverse ascension, I guess you will, out of the American Conference and other places into the Big 12. And then we've seen a cycling through, a domino effect that's impacted the Conference USA more than anybody else in a negative way. And so these conferences are going to just do whatever they need to survive.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I don't see how Kennesaw State, really New Mexico State at this point, Sam Houston State, Jacksonville State, or even FIU, like these teams don't really feel like they belong in the FBS at this point. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so I feel like the only 3 teams worth anything in there that are left, or I guess 4, would be UTEP, Louisiana Tech, Western Kentucky, and Middle Tennessee State. Do you see this conference folding and those 4 getting picked up by other conferences, or do you think they'll survive?
Yeah, and you got Texas San Antonio there as well. But
UTSA is moving to the American.
Oh, that's right. They are moving to the American. Thanks for keeping me updated on that one. That's right. So, yeah, I don't know what the financial status of a league like Conference USA is, because that's going to tell us everything we need to know. Are they making money? Are they solvent to a certain extent? Most of their games are played on maybe at the very best ESPNU. Might get a game or 2 every so often, but other than that, they're on regional TV. So I don't know what their financial situation is. What I find interesting is talking about some of the lower end FBS schools. Is it's one thing for the ones that have conference affiliation, but for the likes of New Mexico State and UMass in particular, and now UConn, to just be floating out there as independents, I don't even know. They're not Notre Dame. They're not going to compete for a national championship. Like,
What's the point?
What's the point? Exactly.
Yep.
What is the point? What are you doing? You're just playing 12 games, and you're going to go 3-9, and you just kind of exist, and you go around and you play this haphazard, thrown together schedule in front of crowds of 8 and 12 and 19,000 people. What is the point?
Yeah. Well, I think so UConn, I feel like a lot of these teams would honestly be better in the FCS. Like UMass and New Mexico State could join, a bigger FCS conference, and instead of going 1-11 every year in the FBS, they could go 8-4, 9-3 in the FCS, and be competing to go to their playoff.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be more better for the program to be, big fish in a small pond instead of small fish in a big pond?
Well, this is where I can't entirely answer that. From a competitive standpoint, yes, you're absolutely right. But by having an FBS team and having some type of contract, I don't know how that works for those independent teams versus what, like Notre Dame obviously has its contract. But I don't know how that works for the rest of them, since they're not affiliated with the conference, but they play games on ESPNU and ESPN2 and wherever else, FS1 occasionally. So I don't know if the benefit financially and whatever they deem to be the prestige and the marketability for their school in playing and getting beat up by teams from the Power Five and some Group of Five conferences, how much they value that. They must put some kind of value on that, as being able to just say we play big boy football. But from a monetary standpoint, I don't know what the difference there would be, because then they go from what they currently have in a television sense to basically playing just regional TV until the FCS playoffs.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't get it. We'll see what ends up happening, but yeah, Kennesaw State maybe moving to the FBS, so that'll get us to 134 teams, which seems like it's getting a little crazy. But last thing I want to say before I go, I know you've got other people. With your idea of having a live stream just open for people to talk, I think that's a great idea. And I think a good addition to that would be to have scores of the games on the screen.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So that way, there's people could tune in, see everything on there, and there's websites you can pull up to do that. But I think that's a great idea. So I'd definitely be there when I can, and I know a lot of other people would be. So
okay. Well, I appreciate the feedback.
Yep. And so, yeah, I hope you have a great night. I hope everyone in chat has a great night. Go Big Red. I was happy to see those Huskers win this weekend. And, yeah, I'll see you next time.
Appreciate it. Have a good weekend. All right. Before we get to our next call, I wanted to point out this comment by Brian Myers. Brian, hopefully you're still with us. I appreciate you chiming in here. Can we all agree that someone can have a valid disagreement even if they don't call in? Mark is not right by default because the person who criticized his top 25 did not call in. Absolutely. People can be smart and have great information about any subject and not verbalize it. Sure. Absolutely. However, the point that I'm making is I don't think it's valid criticism when you just name call and you don't explain yourself. So whether you do that directly, and I think we would have a more productive conversation. Of course, we would have a conversation by somebody calling in, but I don't even get most of these people to explain themselves and why they're critical. They just say, this is a joke, doesn't make sense. Okay, explain yourself. And the best way to do that is to call in. But sure, they can have a valid disagreement and not call in. All right. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. We got David on the line.
To the man that gives college football its voice, the great Mark Rogers, who always makes sense, even if sometimes his top 25 doesn't.
Okay. All right. I'll let you get by with that one.
I kid, Mark, because I care. I just wanted to call in. By the way, I wanted to congratulate you on an excellent week of predictions. Great job this week, my friend.
Finally kind of broke free from 500 there a bit.
Yes.
But, we need to string a few of those together.
Yes, I had a very nice 3-in-1 week myself.
Nice.
And actually interesting, those are kind of the games I wanted to evaluate this week. I want to start by saying the team that I was wrong about and the pick that I got wrong. Maybe I should, obviously we're going to find out a lot this week, but maybe I should be a buyer in Tennessee. I thought that they were a little bit counterfeit. Now, maybe that win says, I don't know where you come down on this, Mark. Does that win say more about where Tennessee is at, or does the loss for LSU say more where they're at right now? I don't know how you
speaks more to LSU.
You think it does
speak more to LSU being dysfunctional because they should not be losing a game by 27 points to anybody in the country with the type of talent that they have. So
on their home field.
On their home field, yeah. Yes. And sure, they, Brian Kelly, he's the one that's responsible for all this. So I'm pointing to him. But at the same time, he can't catch a kickoff for a player that started the whole mess. But he did make some very poor tactical decisions, and his team was unprepared for that game. They were just completely outclassed. And the talent on those two teams is not, if anything, LSU is supposed to have better talent.
Yeah.
And that's why I think when LSU and Florida get together this weekend, those are two very comparable teams that are dysfunctional right now.
Well, I have to say, and I thought that Kelly did, whereas maybe he didn't inherit a loaded roster, he certainly inherited a roster that was good enough to be doing better than it is right now. I don't think there's any doubt about it. You mentioned that. I will say about Tennessee, and I do want to comment, I knew Hooker was very good at quarterback, but they may be a little bit better on both sides of the ball than I thought they were. I don't know how you saw them, on the offensive and defensive side. I knew they were getting really good quarterback play, but and I know you said that it says more about where LSU is at right now, but I think you do have to give some kudos to Tennessee.
Sure. On the defensive side, so nothing that they did surprised me on the offensive side, but on the defensive side, even up until last season, in which Heupel takes over, he gets the offense put together. He finds himself a quarterback, of course, in Hendon Hooker. The running game's devastating. They're scoring a ton of points, but the defense was, for the most part, still lacking, still out of control, blown coverages, missed tackles, missed assignments all over the place. They played a pretty tight defensive game. And, I just saw more players around the football constantly. I didn't see mistakes defensively. I saw about 3 plays in which LSU needed to get to this point to convert, whether that was a 3rd down or a 4th down, and Tennessee either drew up a blitz, got a sack, or their 2 guys in the secondary were able to meet a wide receiver at the point of attack, get there right after the catch, and deny him of a 1st down. They played a tight defensive game.
Yeah, they showed me more on both sides of the ball. There's no doubt about it. And by the way, got to be the biggest game in Knoxville in a while there, huh, Mark?
Yeah. Biggest game in Knoxville. Actually, I was going to do preview, and I was kind of going through the various markings of, when was the last time they produced a top 25 team, a top 15 team, a top 10, a top, and on down the line. When's the last time they beat Alabama? When's the last time they won the East? This has been forever ago that any of these things were accomplished, except for just finishing in the top 25. Yeah, it's been a long time since they've played a significant game.
Well, I think it's fair to say you were a little bit more of a believer than I was. So, I mean, and obviously, once you play Bama, you're going to find out really where you are.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Wanted to get to a couple other games, and I just have to say,
just real quick, David,
yeah.
just to put the capper on that, not to
Sure.
interrupt you, as long as they're playing the Bama with Bryce Young, not that Bama can't beat them without Bryce Young, of course, but to get the full measuring stick game, of course, it's got to be with Bryce Young.
Yeah, it's got to be with their best quarterback, because I think you saw some of the shortcomings of the backup quarterback, obviously, in that game against Texas A&M. I did want to get to Red River, by the way, which is what I saw coming, Mark, I have to say. And I think that game, although I think that does say a lot and bode very well for where Texas is at right now as an offense. And I've been, and it seems like Sark going to the Nick Saban rehabilitation program has done him well. Obviously, what's also done him well is he's got the top-rated quarterback in the country coming there. Quinn decided to come to OSU, get his NIL dollars, and get back to Texas. So I guess good for him. But yeah, I mean, I think that offense is going to be really fun to watch. By the way, is Robinson healthy for them, or did he get hurt in that game?
He got hurt. I don't know the severity of it. I don't hear anybody talking about it, so it must not be that big a deal.
Yeah.
We're going to have a little Texas talk on here tomorrow, so I'll find that out a little bit better then.
I know that, because I think that Quinn Ewers, Bijan Robinson combination, even though that schedule, still perks up with some tough matchups as the season goes along here, what do you think their chances of running the table are, Mark?
Oh, running the table. Well, I think it's low.
Okay.
Because I'm just speaking from a probability standpoint.
I agree. I hear you.
But if we're talking about them winning the Big 12,
yeah,
I would tend to lean a little until I see the two play, and we're only a week away from Oklahoma State, Texas. I still tend to lean Oklahoma a little bit, or Oklahoma State a little bit, but they don't have the top-end talent that Texas does. And certainly Spencer Sanders, despite all of his vast experience, continues to make mistakes, sometimes in critical situations, and they usually work around it some way. But yeah, and when you bring up the combination of Ewers and Bijan Robinson, add to it Xavier Worthy, you've got a triplets kind of deal down there.
Yeah, it's going to be, even if they finish a 9-3 this year, or don't win the conference, with Ewers going forward the next couple of years, it's going to be really interesting to watch. I know you do an Oklahoma show. Where is that program at right now? Are we to believe that and I know that obviously Riley took Caleb Williams with him to USC, but he didn't leave the cupboard that empty either.
No. What can we believe? When you lose games 49-0, who is Texas going to beat 49-0 on the rest of their schedule? Like that, when you talk about the Tennessee LSU example, who does that speak to more?
Right.
Well, this obviously speaks more to Oklahoma. They shouldn't be losing to anybody 49-0. Texas shouldn't be defeating anybody that has a pulse in the country 49-0. That's and it comes off the heels of giving up those double nickels to TCU. And I don't think, TCU just played a really exciting game and beat Kansas by a touchdown, but that was an extremely competitive game. TCU's no great team.
Right.
And yeah, it's just, to take what is probably a top 10 to 15 team in the country, sure, it loses some talent, transition that to the next season. The first two games probably gave us pretty much what we expected against two, group of 5 teams. And then they play this really good game against Oklahoma. And then for it to fall off a cliff. And even before Dylan Gabriel got hurt, they were getting trounced. I don't know how to make anything out of a capable coaching staff allowing a team to regress that much.
Yeah, I mean, I know that when I asked you about the Venables hire, you thought obviously he was a really good assistant for years in Clemson. He knows the culture there at Oklahoma, having been an assistant there. I mean, a lot of people thought it was a good fit. It's going to be interesting to see because the rest of the schedule doesn't get any easier in the next year or two, especially with the SEC coming down the road for that program. Lots of luck, folks.
Yeah, this isn't them just being disappointing from a record standpoint. Okay, TCU, they lost the game 31-28, then they lose to their rival Texas. This is like being completely lost and obliterated 2 weeks in a row. And I think we had this conversation last week that somebody that is the guru that Brent Venables is on the defensive side of the ball, sure, he's going to recruit and get dudes in there, hopefully, for him, that he's going to be able to groom into a vintage Clemson kind of defense. But for the time being, you would think he would make immediate fixes. You would think that it's the biggest shock to me in college football right now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what he does with the staff, and obviously he's got to have to get out there on the trail and bring in the talent. So,
because I got to see.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, David. I was going to say that my initial response to his hiring and them losing Lincoln Riley was, this is a bit of a downgrade, but he's a solid guy. Maybe offensive-minded guys will not, meaning the top wide receivers and the top quarterbacks in the nation, may not gravitate to Oklahoma. So he may be running a very workman-like 9-3 kind of program, transitioning to that. That was my initial thought.
Mm-hmm.
They've lost something with Lincoln Riley, and Brent Venables is a solid guy, and they may make it up with development and defensive scheme and strength and conditioning and some of those things, but they're going to be missing out on these top quarterbacks and top wide receivers.
Yeah.
And then I started to get won over in the offseason by all these recruiting wins and all this positive feedback from, they're just going to be tougher, and their strength and conditioning's been just upgraded because Lincoln Riley kind of let that slide, and I kind of bought into that.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at the last few 24/7 sports composites, and the recruiting has been, pretty solid there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you thought that the talent, now losing Caleb Williams was a loss, and and then you're right. Riley is the quarterback whisperer to a certain extent. I mean, you have back-to-back Heisman Trophy winners and a Heisman finalist, and they put out the offenses that they had over those years. Yeah. I mean, that the next year or two is going to be very, very interesting for him.
I've learned this about myself, David. I've got to guard myself when I host these shows and I get the Kool-Aid, served in front of me week after week after week. Because even Dylan Gabriel, my initial response to that in my mind was, nice player, not an Oklahoma quarterback, in line with Baker, Murray, what they've had. He's not Caleb Williams. He's not that type of talent. That was my initial. And then, week after week, he's really good. He's done this, he's done that. He's looking really good. He's looking amazing in spring ball. I kind of started to elevate him to that. And he's not one of those guys.
Yeah, you got to give Riley a lot of credit for that development, and then also as a play caller and as a schemer too. Wanted to get to the Pac-12. I know that we're gonna have Pac-12 talk this week, but I mean, I continue. UCLA. I saw that over coming. Thanks, UCLA fan, for suggesting to me that would be a high-scoring game. I took it. DTR, Charbonnet, UCLA offense. Brian Kelly's finally got him going. What do you think? USC gets by Utah this week. We get an old school USC UCLA undefeated at the end of the year.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something? Because
No, go ahead.
You probably, David, hear as much as I do from our Pac-12 guys and our USC guys. They're still trying to downplay any kind of playoff talk. But this Utah team is nothing special.
Yeah, you had them as a playoff team. I as a playoff team, Mark. And a few other people did too, to be fair.
Yes, I won't go into that, but I was looking for something different. I was
Sure.
I was making it a little too complicated. I really was thinking Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, but I was thinking, well, what could possibly happen here that I could grab something a little bit different? But anyway, and I made that mistake. Yeah, I watched the UCLA game, a lot of it, and you know, they're not a bad team, but they're not this USC UCLA, and I don't know about Oregon. Oregon's been playing really well, but yeah, this is now becoming with Notre Dame and Utah not being nearly as good as we thought they were. This is setting up for USC. They could run the table.
Yeah, well, the USC guys, and I know you've probably heard their commentary. And rightfully so, I think, to a certain extent, about being able to match, them feeling matching up with the Alabamas, the Ohio State, the Georgias of the world. They don't feel that they're there on the defensive side and in the trenches particularly yet.
Yeah.
They feel that, Grinch needs to build up the defensive side of the football, which they probably do. And that's going to take another recruiting cycle or two. I mean, a lot of them were talking, 9-3, maybe win the conference, 10-2, win the conference, major bowl game would be a really good year, which, I mean, I think that's reasonable to think. But, with the way things are moving, you're right, it lines up. Shades of Rodney Peete and Troy Aikman and those old school UCLA USC matchups we used to watch.
Oh, I know. That would be phenomenal. You, like me, we would watch Ohio State, Michigan, then it would segue right into USC, UCLA. That was phenomenal. Yes.
Well, you did an excellent job of segue, because guess what I was going to talk about next? The prospects of the number one team in the country, that's the Ohio State Buckeyes, which I have to talk about. I feel very confident in this team right now. I know the competition is the competition. I can't help it that Notre Dame's been a disappointment and Wisconsin's been a disappointment. But I think that anybody that can tell is this is a better football team than it was a year ago. I mean, it's a better defense. We struggled defensively against bad football teams last year. And, I think it's clear we're getting really good defensive line play, and our linebacker play is the best I've seen in years, Mark. I know you talked about you haven't seen good linebacker play since the Raekwon McMillan kind of Darren Lee days, and I tend to agree with you. Even 2019, the strength of that defense was its D-line and its secondary. So, and the other thing offensively, I mean, you have a quarterback in its second year, and I've talked about that. We never really got to see Justin Fields in his second year in a Ryan Day offense, because 2020 was chopped up because of COVID. We didn't even, almost didn't even have a season. So I think him having Stroud for a second year, and I don't know what you think, Mark, this offensive line is light years ahead of last year.
Yeah, I made the comment, when was that? I think I was doing a Michigan State preview. I made the comment about the offensive line and we saw it from the fourth quarter against Notre Dame is that it was a really good offensive line last year, and guys are going to make money in the NFL. But I think we can now, we won't know until we see Penn State, and we won't finally know until we see Michigan. But the Ryan Day, this wasn't just lip service talking about making this team tougher and grittier during the offseason. That they truly challenged guys.
Well, playing 4 tackles last year and having guys play it out of position just didn't work out.
True.
And it hurt them in the run game. And you can see them having players playing at the right positions on the offensive line this year has really helped the run game. By the way, just last comment, I saw you on our good friend Mr. Dace's podcast today. Early feel on the game, and I'm sticking with what I said to you about a week or so ago. I see it as a 27-17, 28-17 Michigan win. I do.
Yeah.
I just think that both teams have some strengths defensively. Both teams have running games. I'm just going to say that the Michigan overall passing game with McCarthy, their receivers, is the differential in this game. It just gets them a little bit more productive in the passing game than Clifford and the Penn State wide receivers. That's where I shake out.
Well, yeah, from time to time, Steve likes to hit me with a prediction and a prediction request, and I'm never prepared for it, and I wasn't today. And, I don't make my picks until later in the week. So everything that you said makes total sense. So it's difficult to find a clear check mark in Penn State's column. Michigan, with Penn State upgrading the running game, it's still not it's not a Blake Corum, what we've seen out of him, explosive, huge plays, and a guy that will just take the ball 30 times. He's now done this a few weeks. Take the ball anywhere from 22 to 30 times over and over and over, and both pound and wear down a defense and hit home runs. Penn State's just improved, but Michigan's shown that. Even though I think Penn State has played the one better opponent in Purdue,
right.
Michigan's tested that ground game on the road against Iowa, against an improved Maryland defense. They almost gained 200 yards on the ground against Iowa, and that's tough to do. And even though Clifford's the veteran quarterback, he's making more mistakes and does make more mistakes than what J.J. McCarthy has shown us.
Veteran being an understatement there, Mark. I think he's senior
yeah,
citizen.
he's a better player. That goes without saying. But even you would think that Clifford would make less mistakes with all of his experience.
Right.
The Michigan wide receivers against both the Michigan wide receivers against the Penn State secondary and vice versa will be very good matchups.
Very interesting.
Really good matchups.
I think I also tend to agree with you. I think Michigan's offensive line matches up better against Penn State's defensive line than maybe vice versa too. Possibly.
Yeah. Job 1925 seems to be right there, or that could be Job 1925, of course. Could be right there with us on. I threw out Penn State lean on the Michigan podcast just to kind of be a contrarian. I don't think it adds up for Penn State, and they're on the road. When has Franklin won any big road games?
Hey, you're trying to stir up your largest fan base here on the channel, Mark. You're trying to get them angry at you.
At times. Let's just see. Just have a little fun.
Hey, if they get through it, we've got a very good chance of having 2006 all over again, and I'm all for it. As always, my friend, a great job of college football. Pac-12 show back tomorrow, and I believe you'll have Buckeye talk early, correct?
We actually have the Buckeye show coming up on Thursday morning this week.
Oh, good.
The boys can't make it until Thursday, so I'll need to make sure everybody's got the alert on that one.
Well, I'll make sure I'll be there. Mark Rogers, as always, a pleasure to talk college football with you, my friend.
Thanks, David. I appreciate
Take care of
it.
yourself.
All right, let's keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. Guess I'm talking myself into a Michigan 2-touchdown win as well. The real MVP's on the line. What's going on?
Hey, Mark, how you doing this evening?
I am doing just fine. What's going on with you?
Well, I was looking at your rankings, and I've got a few questions. Okay, before I get into my gripe. Does injuries account if they're major? So, like, if a star quarterback, star running back, or something goes down for most or all of the game, does that matter?
Well, of course, I'm not trying to project how good the team's going to be in the future, but for the game that was played, it's not like I do some kind of deep dive into adding up all sorts of injuries across the board. But yeah, I consider, for example, that Alabama did not have Bryce Young against Texas A&M. Sure.
Okay, and do you consider the other teams wins and losses after they have played? So, like, if a team is 2-0, 3-0, and then it turns out they lose 3 straight games or something like that.
Yes.
Do we consider that into a factor?
Yes, I'm constantly updating the opponent's resume. Sure.
Okay, and the main issue I have, Mark, and I've brought this up before, but I mean, you're wearing a gray shirt, but I think maybe you should be wearing a crimson shirt, because the Alabama Crimson Tide haven't beaten anybody that has had only 1 loss throughout the entire season. The only 2-loss team they have played is Texas, and they should have lost that game, in my opinion. Quinn Ewers got hurt in that game, and every other team they have played has at least 3 losses.
Where would you rank Alabama?
10.
And I've got them ranked 5.
I think it's 5 or 4.
Are they down to? I've got Clemson 1, Ohio State 2, Georgia 3. I might have Alabama 4. Do I have? I think I've got them up to 4, I believe.
You have them 4.
Okay. Texas A&M, and Arkansas are all good teams, meaning I believe that all 3 of those teams are top 20-ish, starting with Texas, then Arkansas. And I know Arkansas lost to Texas A&M, but I'm still going to place them ahead of Texas A&M, then Texas A&M. Those are still 3 really talented teams.
Yeah, but you can be talented and not a good football team. LSU
True.
is a very talented football team.
Yes.
I don't think they're good.
They're not good against that conference.
Well, that's fine, but we can't judge them as what their potential is. We got to judge them what they do against other teams. And if Alabama had played a Tennessee, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and they'd won, I'd say, you know what, 4 makes sense. But they haven't yet. The only teams they've played from the SEC is Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Texas A&M. Until they play that upper tier SEC, I don't think we can take into account the SEC being the best conference as an argument.
True. Yeah, the SEC is the best conference, but that doesn't mean that every team in the SEC, after only 3 games in conference play, has played a tough schedule. Sure, if you played Vandy, Missouri, and Auburn, then you didn't play much of a schedule yet. Sure.
Right. I mean, look at some of the teams behind, like UCLA is a perfect example.
Yeah.
I don't think they would beat Alabama. I don't even think that game would be close. But right now, I would have UCLA above Alabama.
Because they beat Utah.
Yes, and Washington. I know the Washington win isn't as good, but Washington is okay.
You think that defeating Utah and Washington is more valid than Texas A&M, and Arkansas?
I'm not sold on any of those 3 teams yet. Until they resume wise. Now on the field, yes, they are all better, but resume wise, they haven't proved it yet.
Well, that's part of the deal, is that I'm determining how good these teams are as well. I would argue any day that Texas A&M, and Arkansas are better than Washington and Utah collectively.
Okay. Oregon, they beat BYU, they beat Washington State. Their only loss is to number 1, Georgia.
Yeah.
It was a blowout. I get it. It was a complete blowout, but still.
Yeah, that factors into it too.
I know. But I think we need to factor in Texas being better than Alabama based on what the play on the field. Now, the score didn't show it, but on the field product, it did show it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, especially without their quarterback.
Right.
Sure. I got you.
So I think in 2 weeks, if Alabama beats Tennessee and Mississippi State, they should be number 1. But right now, I don't think they should be number 1.
Do we know of anybody playing those type of teams the next 2 weeks?
No.
So yeah, probably that would do it.
I don't believe so. Anybody plays that difficult
Like
for
if
2-game stretch.
like if Michigan beats Michigan State's no good. They've got Penn State and Michigan State the next 2 weeks.
Maybe Penn State because they play Michigan and Minnesota, but it depends if the running back for Minnesota comes out.
Well, there you go. Yeah, Penn State, if they win the next 2 weeks on the road at Michigan and against Minnesota, Purdue, Auburn, put those 4 together.
That would be interesting. I just don't know about the Minnesota running back situation because that win, if you beat Minnesota without their best player, their running back, then that win is not nearly as valuable in my opinion. So that's why I don't think Purdue should have been ranked this week because that win is, in my opinion, tainted because the running back didn't play. But, it is what it is. And you and a previous caller were talking about James Madison.
Yes.
And congrats to James Madison for being ranked. And if they would make the playoffs, if they win 12-0 or a New Year's Six bowl game. As a Kentucky fan, I am a fan of the round ball, the basketball. And there was a scenario last year, very similar to this. The Bellarmine Knights won the ASUN, I believe that's what it's called, conference. And this was their first year in Division I basketball. And they did not go into March Madness tournament. They didn't even get into the NIT. So based on that, I can assume that James Madison would not get an invite.
I don't understand that. Somebody would have to explain the reasoning.
I don't know, but there was big outrage about the Bellarmine Knights not getting into the March Madness, even though they won their conference. And somebody fact checked me on this. It wasn't the team they lost to in the conference championship game that got into March Madness. It was the regular season champion. So it wasn't even, you play all these games in conference and they say the postseason winner goes into it. Well, it wasn't even the team that lost. It was a different team entirely, which makes no sense to me. Because why even have the conference championship game at that point? If you're going to have one team that has nothing to gain from it, it's confusing. It's idiotic, in my opinion.
Yeah, and again, why? So there are student athletes that have nothing to do with the decision of playing FCS versus FBS, but you're penalizing them for a decision that the school made. And again, I don't even know what the reasoning is of suspending eligibility to play postseason games for 1 year. They didn't do anything wrong. I don't understand it. What is going to be determined in a year? Like,
is it just a year? I thought it was longer than that. I thought it was like 4 years.
4 years? Huh. I'll have to look this up.
Yeah, I thought it was like 4 years. I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've looked this up. But
somebody posted an article that says there's a reason for James Madison's bowl ban, but the rule doesn't work. So anyway. The James Madison coach, Kurt Signetti, called it an antiquated rule. Of course, that would be his opinion, and I get it. Yeah. Maybe somewhere in this article it explains what the thought process is behind this rule.
Yeah, so that's it goes back to the NCAA, and I believe in most opinions not making any sense or not having competent rules.
Yeah.
But it'll also be a shame if the 12-team playoff were to occur this year, and James Madison, for whatever reason, was the best group of 5 school, and they wouldn't even get in, that would be a tragedy, I would feel like, for them. Because what are the odds James Madison makes the playoffs?
Yeah.
And for them just to get kicked out because of a silly rule would be ridiculous.
Although you don't think they should be there anyway.
You're right. I don't think they should be there anyway, but listen, everybody wanted representation for the playoffs. People wanted group of 5 team to get a shot. They'll get their shot. They'll get blown out something like 49-3, 70-0, something like that. And everybody will say, oh, good for them. And everybody will turn the game off by the third quarter, most likely. And that's the way it'll be probably year after year after year after year. And then at that point, Mark, I wonder how long before people just say, maybe we shouldn't have expanded the playoffs.
Yeah, so Jeremy's letting us know here it's because of a dumb NCAA rule saying you need 4 years to, quote, transition to Division I. Excuse me. So there's no question that in life, certain things need transition, but they're doing everything. They're not transitioning in anything that they're doing. They're fielding a football team that's got to play FBS opponents. They're playing in a conference that's an FBS. They're automatically doing all the transitioning, except for they can't play in a bowl game at the end of the year. They can't play one extra game. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and the fact it's 4 years is also...
Yes, 4 years. They have to transition for 4 years. Well, they're not transitioning. They're going directly into it. There's nothing about it that's transitioning. It's not like they're playing 3 games 1 year. It's not like they're playing 3 FBS opponents the first year and the rest FCS, and then they're slightly, just gradually transitioning into this. Or, they need to build a stadium or something. No, they're jumping in full go. Game 1. I don't know.
Yeah, that's crazy to me. And that means if it's 4 years at the first, the first few years of the college, it might be impacted by the college football playoff if they move it up quicker. Because I have a feeling that since we've got a format for the college football playoff, that it'll be moved up to probably next season or at most the season after that. So this could be an actual storyline.
I sure hope so. We need to get this thing underway.
Mark, I will never understand why you want a 12-team playoff. Listen, if you want a 12-team playoff, that's fine, but I just don't understand it. So.
Well, I like the idea of having that many teams in the playoff, but it doesn't work from a mathematical standpoint without buys, and I'm against buys. So if we could guarantee that we did not have opt-outs, I would actually be for a 16-team playoff. But that's not going to work because we're going to have what we discussed the other night. We're going to have opt-outs because that's just too many games for these guys to play. So I am actually for an 18 in the real world, which is what we live in. I am for an 18 playoff.
8's fine. I mean, I like the 4, but as the second best option, the +1's the best option in my opinion. But I was giving into the 8 because people just were persistent that it's going to expand, and I saw the writing on the wall; it was going to expand. But I'm a fan first. And I don't want too many blowouts. And if we get blowout after blowout after blowout, I think that's going to take a hit to the meaningfulness of the games. And I think we can already see that in the 4-team playoff that the semifinal games, we're just hoping for a good game now. It's not even we're talking about the teams as much. It's, oh man, can this game be within 10 points? And the answer is usually no.
Well, I can't argue with that. The facts are the facts, and the history is the history. And we've had blowouts in the semifinals for the most part. We've had a few great games, but not many.
Right. And then the way they've done it with this specific playoff bracket ensures the bottom left quadrant, the 5-12-4. The 5 is basically guaranteed in because they're going to be the number 2 overall team most likely, or number 3 overall team, either being Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, or Ohio State. It'll mostly be one of those 4 teams beating up on some group of 5 school and then beating up on probably the Pac-12 champion every single year. So the SEC will still have, guess what, 2 of the 4 final spots, and everybody will be upset saying, man, this SEC bias, the SEC. And then what's great is if the 6-11 matchup, if the 6th seed was like a Tennessee type, you could have 3 of the 4. You could actually have more SEC teams with this playoff structure, because what people don't understand is if you have more playoff spots, you're giving the SEC more chances to prove that they're the best conference.
Yeah.
And if you put Tennessee versus Michigan on a neutral field, I could see Tennessee winning that game.
Sure.
If Tennessee played Clemson, Tennessee could win that game.
Yep.
So, I mean, look at it this year. Alabama Tennessee beats Bama. Georgia beats Tennessee. Okay? All 3 of those teams went out. Except for, and then we'll say Georgia beat Bama in the SEC title game. In my opinion, all 3 of those teams should make the playoffs, because those will most likely be 3 of the 4 best teams. Now, it won't, it's first off, it's unlikely to happen. Second of all, I don't think the committee's going to put 3 of the 4 teams being SEC teams, but that's a very somewhat possible scenario this year.
Well, my defense for an expansion is number one. I believe that if you play in a conference, then you should be able to go to the playoff by winning the conference. I think all the conferences should be represented. So that's my first defense for an expanded playoff. My second one would be that I don't believe that we should be forming a playoff to eliminate blowout games. I don't think that should be our motivation for formatting and structuring a playoff. We should format and structure the very best playoff system we can, and then allow the games to play out the way they are. I don't think it's up to the playoff committee or whomever is charged with developing and formatting the playoff to try to fit it into some kind of competitive situation. Like,
the second point I agree with. I just think the system itself is skewed in such a way that it makes almost no sense to me, because you're hurting better teams just because of the region they play in. And I don't like that. I want to see the best teams. So like Michigan, most years they're not going to beat Ohio State, but yet they're getting punished to probably being the 6th seed because they play in the Big Ten. I don't think that's fair to them. Georgia is going to get punished because they're most likely going to lose to Alabama, and yet they've got to be put behind the ACC champion and the Pac-12 or champion. So while we're helping teams' profiles, we're also hurting other teams' profile for no fault of their own. Do you not see that as a concern?
I see it as 2 different ways to look at it. One being that you give representation to the entire country, and we have so few non-conference games to determine who truly are the best teams that are not conference champions, that even though you and I and a ton of other people believe that in most years, if not in all years, the second and the third best teams in the SEC are better than other teams, other conference champions, that wasn't really proven on the field. Most years it won't be proven in the regular season on the field because we just won't have the right matchups to prove that. It's just going to be all based on, well, we know what the recruiting rankings are, and we know what we see every year, and we know what's been proven in the past. So most likely Georgia's the the second best team in the SEC is the third or fourth best team in the country, and the third best team in the SEC is the fifth or sixth best team in the country. And we kind of know that, but there's not a regular season schedule to prove it.
So how many years of let's say the Big 12, for example, they get 2 or 3 playoff teams, and they go 0 for 3 or 0 for 2, and they're something like 1 of 11 after 5 or 6 years. Is that enough to say, hey, clearly this is 2 different classifications of football, and maybe this wasn't the best idea? Because I think that's what could happen. The Big Ten and SEC, through their not conference expansion moves, their talent has just separated themselves so much. I don't think they'll be competitive in the future with the SEC or Big Ten. And they'll get this honorary playoff spot, and it'll be called an honorary bye for the SEC or Big Ten team.
Then we're in a bad place. Because after 5 to 10 years, we're either, as you say, I don't want to say giving, but those teams are earning based on their schedule and winning a conference championship playoff spots, but they are clearly showing that they're not competitive enough. And so then a decision's either going to be made that you're separating the SEC and the Big Ten to another level to play a championship and going to eliminate. Then you're really regionalizing the sport and shutting off a large portion of America.
Like, did you see the bracket that the Patreon people came up with?
Yes.
Michigan was supposed to play Oregon. Utah was supposed to play Tennessee. And most likely Georgia was supposed to play USC.
Okay.
I don't see any way any of those 3 Pac-12 teams win. Those are all good teams. But the problem is the teams that are playing are great teams in all 3 of those matchups. And in some cases, it's no fault of their own. Like Oregon. They happen to play probably the 3rd or 4th best team in the country. USC probably has to play the 2nd best team in the country. It's not their fault. It's just the way it's set up. And it's going to grow this perception that certain conferences are weaker than others instead of shrink the perception. What do you think about that?
Well, I think based on the way the playoff has played out and what you're outlining is true. That's what it will. The thing that we can't factor into this, that we can only speculate as to whether this could be an offshoot of this playoff, would be whether this is going to change recruiting success for certain schools and conferences.
Do you think it'll change recruiting if Baylor offers a kid versus Tennessee? Baylor comes in there, says, you know what? We've been blown out. We've made the playoffs the last 3 years. And then he looks at the score, and it's been by average of 30 points. Something like that. And you got Tennessee who's playing in these games. They may not make the playoffs every year, but when they make it, they win a playoff game. Do you think that's going to make such a big difference?
Well, the thought process is that if you can guarantee that a Pac-12 champion is going and the Big 12 champion is going, and more than likely they'll either get another team or another 2 teams into the playoff, that yes, then there's going to be incentive in the recruiting process for players to stay closer to home or to go to other teams and other conferences, because there is a legitimate shot where it seems to be closed off to 5 schools now. There's going to be a legitimate shot at making the playoffs at these other places.
Yeah, you're talking just about making the playoffs, though. I'm talking about once those teams play those big boys.
Sure.
And we see what Georgia did to Oregon. And I think the perception of Oregon, Georgia this year has grown because of the game. I mean, Oregon still isn't probably getting the respect they deserve. If they just scheduled East Tennessee State instead of Georgia,
Yeah.
they would be 6-0. They would most likely be a top 5 team right now.
Yeah.
But at the end of the playoffs, and then we see them lose 49-3, let's say, to Georgia, we're going to be like, man, all the smoke and mirrors from the Pac-12 teams once again. And that's what I'm afraid to see.
Yeah. You're drawing up a worst case or close to a worst case scenario, whereas I'm looking at it more pragmatically, just that we need a system that involves inclusion for all the conferences, and that is a reasonable system where we see all these other sports, this sport on different levels, and other sports where there's more inclusion of teams that can participate toward a championship, and not 4 out of 130. And it's not the fault of Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, etc., that they dominate. It's more up to the other conferences and the other schools to raise their game to be competitive. I've never heard, including myself, I'm not saying I have the answer to this either, why during the 1980s, let's say, why the landscape was so much more competitive and what's changed since then. Maybe it's just sheer, the money has increased so much that Illinois and Iowa, et cetera, can't keep up with Ohio State, where, you know, I'm just throwing out figures that don't make sense, but they'll prove a point that when the operating budget was $10,000 for each of them, and let's say Ohio State had 12,000 instead of 10,000, that it was close enough to stay within reason. But when it became $1 million, so Iowa and Illinois were at $1 million, Ohio State can go to $4 million. That they became, that's what became the determining factor of 5 or 6 schools separating from everybody else. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with almost everything you said there. The only thing I have a problem with is what you said. I'm saying worst case scenario. I think it's not I think it is worst case scenario. I think it's pretty likely case scenario as well, because of how lopsided these games have been. If half the games were 24-21, 3-point games, 7-point games, even 14-point games, you would have a point with it being me saying worst case scenario. But I think it's also pretty likely that this happens.
Well, yeah, we've seen it for the last 8 years.
Yeah, so I don't think worst case scenario was exactly a fair characterization of it, but
well, it's the worst and the most likely at the same time.
Okay, that's fair.
It's both.
That's fair. I've probably taken too much of your time, Mark. I apologize if I have. I'll give a shout out to Oregon State. I'm not sure if you saw their game against Stanford. It looked like Oregon State was dead to right in the waters, but I tell you what, Oregon State had resiliency, and they had an incredible play to end the game where Oregon State threw a pass. The guy caught it. The Stanford defender was literally turned around. The Oregon State guy ran for a touchdown. It was a great game. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend watching it.
Well, I appreciate that, and it was a crazy finish, and it was featured on Bad Beats on ESPN. So that's where I did see that play a few times, and if anything, that play underlines what you're talking about. Like, I cannot imagine. So I watched that play about 4 times, and there's one Stanford defensive back that's legitimately kind of going for the ball, gets turned around, everything you just said. There's another one who kind of like runs up to the play, and he just kind of stands there and lets the guy run right by him. And it's like, what are you watching? You just watched this guy you just watched you lose the game, because it was almost like, when I think about that kind of play happening, which is very exciting and it's entertaining, but sometimes the lesser teams create the more exciting games and plays because they're not as perfect as the powerhouse teams. I was thinking, I don't know that you see that. I don't know that you see that play if Alabama's playing Clemson.
Maybe not, but it was still a great play. And
it was a great play, but I'm actually kind of connecting that to what you're talking about with the difference of these teams.
Yeah, and we got tons of great games this week. I'm sure you're going to break them all down this week. Early upset possibility I'm just going to throw out there is Florida State versus Clemson. Not sure if you've seen the line on that game, but Vegas is liking Florida State a lot more than I thought they would.
Yeah.
So that would be very exciting if Clemson lost. But anyway, Mark, I'll see you later. Hit the like and subscribe button.
Thanks, man. All right. We will keep it moving with 3 more calls right here at the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Oh, hey, Mark. Thanks for having me. Well, first, I was really interested in like the last conversation. I know you talked about it a lot, but I just want to add one more thing about like the extension of the playoffs. I also think one thing that could have aided to where people not being really satisfied with the 4-team format is also how different criteria has changed. Because I remember when there was like 2 years where TCU, before they joined the Big 12, they went like undefeated and they were like winning in their bowl games against like the number 4 team. But because the BCS only took 2 teams, they always finished third. And then when they made the 4-team playoff, I'm like, okay, so that means like a group of 5 team would easily be like 3 if they go undefeated. But as you know, like how they weigh like resumes and stuff has kind of changed. It's not so much as record based. And my thing is, could that criteria change even more if they expand to a 12-team playoff?
Well, the way it's being talked about right now, there would be a guaranteed spot for a group of 5. The best of the group of 5 get a guaranteed spot. And otherwise, this committee is going to continue to weigh resumes, and they're going to, deliver a rankings system, that is going to determine the playoff. The only thing that's different than what it is now is that there are going to be guaranteed spots for both a group of 5, but also the 4 or the 5 conference champions, and 4 get a bye. So it's almost going to come down to basically the committee deciding the other 7 spots.
Okay, and is there like a guaranteed like position that they would get? For example, like even if they get guaranteed, it would probably be like, could it just be like 16 every year, for example? And like if they win, they like match up against Bama or something, or Georgia, Ohio. Yeah.
So you're wanting to know whether a group of 5 can possibly get a higher ranking than the last spot in the playoff.
Right, because if it becomes more like resume oriented and not so much record oriented, I feel like that could based on the trend from BCS to the playoff system, it could be more to where like they put Pac-12 and group of 5s at the bottom.
Yeah.
And then it's like SEC Big Ten at the top.
So the answer to your question based on past history is that it's possible that a group of 5 could elevate higher than that, but it's unlikely and it's going to be rare. So we just saw it last season with Cincinnati. If there was a 12-team playoff, Cincinnati would still be the 4 seed.
4th.
So they were the 4. And even if we had a 12-team playoff, they would be the 4. But we also saw a situation where UCF was undefeated back-to-back years. And if I'm not mistaken, somebody can check me on this, one of those years they were 8th, and the other year they were 12 as undefeated teams. So they would theoretically have been the last seed, as you were talking about, but then they would also have been an 8 seed playing 8-9 game.
Okay, now that you mention, yes, that is true. Yeah, maybe now that you say that, it would probably end up a little higher if it's like a team like go undefeated, for example. Okay, and I also want to get your thoughts on how the Big 12 has performed. Because personally, I'm an SEC fan, but my favorite games this season have been like the Big 12 games. They've been really exciting and stuff. And I don't know what's your assessment on how good the teams are, because I see some people say there's not necessarily any like great or elite teams, but it's just a lot of really good teams. And I just want to get your assessment on that.
Well, I would agree with that. I've been talking about that for a long time, that and once it expands with the 4 additional teams, we're going to see more of the same, where from an entertainment standpoint, from a football standpoint, it's going to be fun to watch the Big 12. And it's fun this year. Think about, it's funny to say that Oklahoma is the worst team. Take them out, and can't you imagine just about anybody in the Big 12 beating just about anybody else from the Big 12? It's an extremely deep and competitive league. That doesn't bode well for a playoff run, though, for 2 reasons. Number one, they're going to, again, win games against each other and cannibalize themselves. So there's not going to be a team with an outstanding record, most likely, to elevate into a high position in the playoff rankings. And number 2, I just think it's obvious to everyone that keeps track of the recruiting, the talent base, the quality of these teams, that we're going to look at a future Big 12 where we're going to see a lot of teams that are like 20 to 40 in the country, 15 to 40 in the country. And it's going to be very difficult, minus Texas and Oklahoma, for any of them to consistently or even ever be a top 3 or 4 team in the country. Now, you're talking about the performance this particular year. I've been extremely impressed with the Big 12 this season. If we are this close away, we are this close to have seen Baylor beat BYU on the road in overtime and Texas defeating Alabama, and we would really see a strong Big 12 showing right now. We've seen Kansas go outside a conference and beat Duke. We've seen TCU beat Colorado, which is, of course, awful. That's not a whole lot there. But Texas, again, plays extremely well against Alabama, should have won the game, outplayed Alabama. Oklahoma State won its non-conference game, albeit Arizona State. Baylor had that game against BYU that I just mentioned. Iowa State won its matchup with Iowa. On down the line, just about every matchup went the Big 12's way. West Virginia lost a tough game at Pitt, but the conference has shown itself. Kansas State lost against Tulane, okay, but also beat Missouri by 4 touchdowns. The Big 12, I came into this season, I'll state it this way. I came into this season for the first time thinking that there were 5 very clear distinctions in the conferences, that the SEC was clearly the best, that the Big 10 was clearly the second best, that the Big 12 was most likely the third best, and the ACC the fourth, that those were the only 2 that I would have to wait and see, and that the Pac-12 was by far the worst. But the actual results on the field, now that they've played, have shown us something different. The SEC is playing the best, but the Big 10 is not playing the second best. The Big 12 has played and posted better results than the Big 10. And then the ACC is there, and the Pac-12 is maybe still the worst conference, but not by far. It's an argument. It could be the third best or the fourth best conference. It's not clearly the worst. And if it is the worst, it's not by much. So that's what I think of the Big 12. I think the Big 12 has represented itself very strong. There are no embarrassing results out of the Big 12 in terms of non-conference play. You could say Kansas State and Tulane because you shouldn't lose to a group of 5, but I don't consider that an embarrassing loss. So the Big 12 has played extremely well.
Oh yeah, I agree. I actually had the same perception too, where you said SEC clear best, Big Ten clear second, but like, you know, that like the difference from like 1 to 3, it's very little. I think SEC is also falling back a bit, though last year I think SEC in terms of competitive standpoint was like one of the best years in past few years for sure. Big Ten, I can't tell you how many times I debated Big Ten fans about about how bad their conference is, but I will say Purdue is starting to impress me. Like that Purdue Maryland game, I still need to rewatch that game, but that was definitely they definitely look like some solid good programs, and I'm still unsure about Illinois or Maryland. I'd have to go back and watch that, but I mean Illinois, Minnesota, but hey, I mean there's that, and then all of a sudden Nebraska's winning in the West. I still think the West is terrible, but like at the same time, they might not be as bad as what I was thinking they were after 3 weeks.
Yeah, the West is bad. The West is bad, but it's an entertaining bad. It'll be a ACC coastal kind of situation where unless somebody separates themselves, and I thought after 4 games, I thought if somebody separates themselves, it looks like Minnesota's the most complete team, but then they go and lose to Purdue, which even more tightens up the race. So it doesn't look like anyone's going to run away with that. I could see a 6-3 division winner easily.
I can see that too. When you mention like that, it is definitely going to be competitive, and I don't want to hold up too much, so I'll just ask one question. But I don't know if you have. I'm pretty sure you have. You watched that Michigan Indiana game, and it's like, what do you think about like the passing game of Michigan? Because Indiana was like ranked like one of the worst pass defenses in the country, and like it didn't feel like Michigan was really taking advantage of that. And I think JJ McCarthy has talent. It's just they're not really, at least how I feel. I'm not sure. They're not letting him just throw it as much as he should.
Yeah, I think that Jim Harbaugh tends to want to, and we saw this early last season, that he is more comfortable with beating teams the way that he knows his personnel and their talent level can beat teams without necessarily thinking, I want to develop A, B, and C for this game or that game or Ohio State or a playoff or whatever. He leaves it to, this is our identity. This is how we play. This is the safest way to win this game. So that's what we're going to do. It served them well for the most part, unless you want to take into account the Georgia game last year, and they probably weren't going to win that game regardless of what they did. So that was very much, I didn't see much of that game. There were some really good games on at noon last week, and I did not anticipate Michigan, Indiana being one of them. So I didn't really check into that one until that 10-10 lingered more and more into the third quarter with TCU and Kansas playing and LSU and Tennessee. And there were a couple other really good games. So I didn't see a whole lot of that, but I know from watching the Iowa game and then going back and look at the numbers, there was really only one, and it wasn't even a shot downfield that they took against Iowa. It was just a ball down the seam, basically, was the only ball that was thrown longer than maybe 15 or 16 yards downfield. And it seemed as though that was pretty much the way they approached Indiana.
You're right. It's just like I'm asking all this because like does Michigan really feel like a contender? Because for me, it feels like they're like a 7th, 8th best team to me. They're not really going to be top 5. Maybe next year, especially if Blake Corum returns, because he's an animal. And but yeah, I just don't know.
So outside of Clemson, who do you think is better than them besides the obvious teams?
There's no obvious teams that are better than them, but there's a case for like Tennessee. There's a case for for like man, I'm forgetting the top 10. I guess I want to say Oklahoma State, but they allowed like 500 yards against Tech this weekend. So I'm not, even though Tech's a good offense, solid offense, I'm not too sold. There's some. I know there's one team off the top of my head. I'd have to look at the rankings. But
well, maybe USC.
USC. Oh, Penn State. I think Penn State is kind of like, of course, you know, I've never been a Sean Clifford fan, but like, I guess he's been playing solid this year. I guess. I haven't watched too much Penn State, but to be honest with you, but I have seen like some of like the highlights and stuff from those like running backs. They look legit. Penn State could probably beat Michigan. That would be a good game. Other than that,
they're playing this Saturday, so we'll find out.
We'll find out. But anyways, Mark, thank you so much for letting me come in to talk. It's a pleasure hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. Call back anytime.
Thank you so much. Good night.
All right, we got Zach on the line. We'll take Zach's call, and then we got Nick, and we'll wrap it up from there. Zach, how you doing tonight?
Doing good, Mark. How about you?
I am doing just fine. What's going on?
I don't know. I want to talk about the Mountain West. Like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on in Mountain West this year. It's like all the good teams are bad, and the bad teams are good this year.
Yeah, true.
Like UNLV is like leading their division,
yeah.
And like they went 2-10 last year. It's like, what do you think? Like, what do you think is going on over there? Like, why are these teams like?
Well, anytime something like that has happened, it typically comes down to coaching, because certainly the approach to football by the administration and the school and their dedication to football doesn't change in 1 year. So I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think that Andy Avalos was not a great hire by Boise State. I think that comes to mind initially. I also think that the conference as a whole is not, and of course Fresno State lost Kalen DeBoer, that the conference is not nearly as good as it's been. This is the worst Mountain West conference version of the Mountain West that we've seen in I don't know how long. Long. And I got a lot of respect for the Mountain West because, as you say, you know, this has been collectively a difficult out for the Pac-12 year in and year out. You know, those two conferences probably play more than any two conferences in the country. And the Mountain West has held its own in recent years, but this year, I don't know out of these teams. Like typically, San Diego State, Fresno State, and Boise are really good. And you know, then you can throw in a couple other schools like a Nevada, a Hawaii that they're Utah State
Air Force,
at times,
Air Force,
that are Air Force, of course, that are top 45 to 50 good. But this group of teams, I don't know who's any good. I think they finally won their first game against a Power 5, and I can't even remember who that. Well, Air Force beat Colorado, but I think there was one other. Anyway, it's just not been a good year for the Mountain West.
Kind of like I said, I know the Sun Belt's good. You know, I think they're the best group of 5, like this year at least. But again, James Madison, Coastal Carolina. Also, I want to get your take on: do you think Shaw and Fitzgerald are on a hot seat this year at Stanford and Northwestern?
So I posted a video about a week ago.
I saw about that.
Listed, 10 coaches on the hot seat, and I don't exactly remember where I ranked those two. They are two interesting examples because they do have a lot of respect. Now, the one thing Fitzgerald has is, of course, not that this should factor into keeping a coach, but he is a legend at that school from a playing standpoint.
Oh, yeah. Well, both schools are private institutions, so yeah.
Yeah, so they're not going to cut loose a coach quite as quickly as somebody else will. And they're both just, they're, you know, you don't look at them and see Herm Edwards, Jeff Collins, Scott Frost, kind of like where you're unsure of their ability to lead a program and make the right decisions. And they seem rock solid. And what's curious about David Shaw is Stanford continues to recruit really well. I think right now they've got the 19th rated class in the country, and they brought in about 6 4-stars. Even though a lot of the recent rules seems to be going against them, they continue to recruit well. But and my one knock on David Shaw is that what I don't know about him is that he didn't build that program. So it's not like he showed up, turned around from 2-10 to a BCS bowl team.
Yeah, which I say Harbaugh probably, Harbaugh be the one, he'd say that he built that program up and Shaw just kind of took it over. Yeah.
Shaw sustained it for a while, and then he had his transition into kind of like an 8-4 kind of team. And then now it's just they are so bad.
I know. I was watching the Oregon State game last week, and I was like, it's like nobody in the stands at Stanford.
Nobody's in the stands, and just everything that they used to be predicated on, like a great offensive line with a running back or two that were really good. They could run that. They can't run the ball. Their defense is awful. They've got an NFL quarterback, and I'm sure they've got a couple other guys. I have really lost track of Stanford personnel. I will admit to that.
Yeah.
I haven't watched a whole lot of Stanford in the last 3 seasons.
Well, living out west, I get them on ESPN, so I can watch them.
Yeah. I used to watch a lot of Stanford because they were playing important games throughout the year, USC and Oregon and Notre Dame, etc. But the last 3 seasons, they've been so lousy that they haven't played important games.
Yeah, but I could see them once USC and UCLA leave. I could see them kind of being competitive again, probably.
Yeah, well, they've certainly shown the ability to be competitive with those teams.
Yeah,
in the Pac-12.
Yeah, but I can see it more once they leave because you don't have to face them every year, and Shaw can build up. Yeah, and then I got one more question, if you don't mind. James Madison, do you think they should be ranked, or do you think another team like Coastal Carolina should be ranked over James Madison?
So I made that comparison, and I just thought that. So this is what I'm looking at here is that. It's a pretty direct comparison, and I was interested to see when they're finally going to play, which I think is near the end of the season.
Yeah, I think it's at Coastal too. I think I could be wrong.
But James Madison, and of course they got a game against Louisville. Not that that's some significant win.
No,
if it was anybody in the Power 5, but see, these are the kind of games that I think underline that there is a significant gap. Most likely, they're going to lose that game to Louisville.
Probably,
I can imagine. At least has their head screwed on straight, and they have some investment in the game. They'll most likely win that game, and that's going to show. Okay, one of the worst Power 5 teams beats, the possible Sun Belt champion. Anyway, what did it for me was, first of all, they beat App State. Coastal Carolina doesn't have a win anywhere close to App State. They beat Middle Tennessee, of course, who famously beat Miami. They beat them by 37 points. And other than the App State game, all the other outcomes were dominant outcomes. Whereas opposed to Coastal Carolina, my goodness. Okay, I guess Army's the best team. Army or Buffalo that they've beaten, maybe?
Yeah, Buffalo, I see.
They've played a lot of close games, 28-21. This Louisiana Monroe game, that was a close one. I saw some of that. Georgia Southern, they only won by 4. All these, most of their Gardner Webb, they only beat them by 4. So that was my distinction between those two.
You guys figure, again, Coastal, again, I don't think James Madison could even be in a bowl game this year because of the transition.
True.
Yeah, I don't think they can. I don't think could they play in the Sun Belt Championship? I don't know. I could be wrong. I don't know. I don't know if they can even play in the Sun Belt Championship game. But yeah, I just don't know. I saw Coastal, more established program. Again, they have the transition years over James Madison. I don't know. That's all I just figured.
Well, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for the call.
No problem, Mark.
All right. Last up for the night here at the Voice of College Football. And keep in mind, we're back here Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern. And also keep in mind, I know that a ton of you that I'm talking to right now, which is about 100 on the line, and we should have about 2,000 to 3,000 that watch eventually. When you shop, you're going to shop on Amazon. So please use the link that we provide in the description section. It helps build the channel. So it's the same shopping experience. It doesn't cost you one penny. Same shopping experience. Once you grab the link, you're in Amazon just as you are with whatever link that you would use otherwise. So please grab the link in the description section of the videos, put it somewhere where you will remember it. Yes, Ben's got it right there. And Shoelace Sooner, we appreciate your super chat and hope that you get well soon. Which reminds me, I want to say this before we get off tonight here, that does anyone know anything about George? George watches, interacts all the time, leaves a ton of comments, obviously calls the show. Does anybody know if George is okay and what he's been up to? If he just got sick of listening to me, I'm fine with that. But we want to make sure that George is okay. So if anybody has contact with George, we would love to know that he's doing okay, that everything is fine with George. All right. Last up here at the Voice of College Football, we got Nick on the line.
Hey, Mark, can you hear me?
Hey, Nick. Yeah, we got you.
Just quick.
Hey, Nick. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I got you now.
Okay, I think I'm cutting out a little bit. So let me know if does it sound clear? Am I cutting out a little bit?
Yeah, you sound clear. Just for a little while, couldn't hear anything. Hello, Nick?
Yeah, you still there?
There you are.
Okay. No, I think I'm on my phone. I have my notes pulled up here, but I think it's cutting out when I do that. I can just go by memory. First of all, I was kind of curious, why did you pick Penn State over Michigan?
So you saw the Michigan podcast, obviously.
Well, it's a great podcast. I love great podcasts.
Well, yes. Yeah, Dace is amazing. Of course. Yes.
Well, you're good too. You're good too.
No, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be watching Michigan podcasts. I'm just reacting and responding to, obviously, you watched that because he put me on the spot to give a pick. And I don't make predictions until like Thursday or Friday. So
you did say you were spitting in the face of logic. So
yes, I was spitting in the. So if you weren't around for an earlier caller, I'll tell you why I was spitting in the face of logic. Neither one of these coaches have performed well against the top 10, although when they do win, they win at home. And obviously Michigan's the home team. So there's an obvious point there. Michigan's a much better team at home, or a decided better team at home. Penn State would be as well. And even the history backs that up. So there's one point there. When I look at the two running games, so Penn State was an awful rushing team last year, bottom 5 in the country. They have upgraded that significantly, but I don't know how much that, and I believe in that upgrade. Nick Singleton's the number 1 running back coming out of high school, but he's still only got 5 games under his belt as a college football player. And Katron Allen, the same thing. So they're relying on 2 true freshman running backs versus a Michigan well-oiled Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. I know that not all those guys were starters last year, but just about all of them, plus the Virginia center, who's just, I think, a tremendous player, Oluwatimi at center. And then you add to that, Singleton's going to be a great player. I think he's an emerging star and all that, and Allen's a good player. But Blake Corum is in his prime. He's reached another level as a explosive back, but also a smart back and a tough back that's carried between 22 and 30 rushes the last 3 weeks against really good teams.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Absolutely.
And I'm a Michigan fan, but doesn't Steve Dace always brings this up a lot? He always loves to compare Blake Corum to to J.K. Dobbins. And I get where he's coming from, and I would almost put Blake Corum in his own category, but I still remember highlights of J.K. Dobbins just torching us for years. And I don't know, it makes me cringe a little bit when even that's said. That's nothing against Blake Corum. I think he's different. I understand it. But does that bother you a little bit every time you hear that?
I heard it out of him a couple of weeks ago, and that was the first time I remember hearing it from him, and it just didn't really faze me. I'm not that adept at making player comparisons. Like, guys don't come to mind. I do it once in a while if it really strikes me, but I'm not the type that's always looking at players thinking, who did they remind me of from 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
I just remember JK, especially against Clemson in the playoffs. Like, that dude just bull rushing. I mean, he is, let me put it this way. Besides Ezekiel Elliott, he is the last person that I would ever want to tackle that I've ever seen play college football. So, I mean,
so you make a great point. I think Blake Corum's become more of a powerful runner. He's obviously worked on his body. He's become stronger, but that's still not his game.
He's more finesse, I think.
Yeah. You can see in his lower body, he's a stronger runner. You can see him take on would-be tacklers, but that's still not his game. Still not his forte. But to run the ball for, I think, 172 yards as a team against Iowa is a really impressive accomplishment. That is something we haven't necessarily seen Penn State. We just haven't seen them have to run against a strong rush defense. And that's what they're going to have to do. In a typical year, Auburn's defensive front and front seven would be that kind of challenge, but it wasn't this year. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this, and I know that I'm not matching up offense and defense, I'm matching up more running back versus running back and running game versus running game. But when you look at the two quarterbacks, that J.J. McCarthy's the younger player, but at least up until this point, he doesn't make mistakes. Through his first pick last week, I believe. Sean Clifford is a guy with a ton of experience that continues to make some mistakes. Mm-hmm. Not a ton of mistakes, but, I mentioned to Steve today that I watched the Purdue game, and then I rewatched the last 3 or 4 drives because I wanted to see again what I thought I was seeing. And that was that on the very last drive of the game, Sean Clifford was flawless. But for 3 consecutive drives before that, he was awful. He missed every throw. Not every throw, but every meaningful throw he missed. And then he somehow put it together for about 4 straight throws to win the game. So he's not wildly inconsistent. He's not Jaden Daniels or Emory Jones, wildly Anthony Richardson inconsistent, but he's inconsistent, more so than he should be at this stage in his career.
Okay.
And I do think that the Michigan wide receivers against the Penn State secondary and the Penn State wide receivers against the Michigan secondary are both going to be fascinating matchups, because I think the talent is top 2 to 3 in the Big Ten for all those groups.
So you still are confident in your Penn State pick?
No, I'm not confident in it. Absolutely not. No, like I said, I was spitting. I was just making. That's not my official pick. That's just Dace throwing it out there, and I had to respond with something, and I thought, you know what? In the moment, in the split second, I kind of spit in the face of logic, and also thought, you know what? I'll shake up his Michigan audience a little bit and talk a little bit about how Penn State's going to win this game. Maybe it's a little bit of a punch.
Well, I'll give you credit there. You shook me up when I heard that. I was like, "Are you kidding me?" No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Anyway, but the next thing too, I don't know. Did you hear? Obviously, there's been some talk about the Mike Hart situation. What happened Saturday? You're a busy man, so but Did you catch Dre and Desmond's take on that on the Michigan channel, or get any hint of that?
No, I did not, even though
Okay.
that's my channel. But they
well, like I
no,
said,
I
you're a
didn't
busy
watch their
guy.
first
You're
game.
a busy guy.
Yeah, I'm doing everything I can on a Saturday to watch and listen to, do what I'm doing. But anyway, I cut them loose to do their thing on the Michigan channel after the game, but I did not see what they had to say. No.
So I'm just gonna throw my take out there because I listened to what they said, specifically to Desmond, and it's not that big of a deal, but I was a little bit disappointed, especially with him playing football. They likened it to players just need to move on because injuries happen in football all the time, and then he specifically said, the audience might not understand this, but a lot of the times in football practice, because I believe he played D3 football, if a player gets injured, the coaches might move the team 10 or 15 yards down the field to continue practice while that player is getting attended to. And they were kind of, I don't want to say like criticizing the Michigan players, but like at the same time, they weren't understanding the seriousness of the situation with that. And just any generality, like it happened late in the first quarter. Like Michigan was actually struggling a little bit before Mike Hart went down. Like especially after that, like I just wanted to point out, maybe I can get your take on this. First of all, when an injury happens in football for a player, there's obviously an explanation. Players get on the field, there's a risk. So if something serious happens, at least there's an explanation. Or as a human being, you can understand why this is happening. That's a big difference between a coach going down. And also, players have potentially medical history. Mike Hart has no medical history of a seizure. So it's basically like you're at an event and Mike Hart is a beloved coach, which you saw the players crying on the sideline and everything, or the running backs. He has a seizure out of nowhere. And just as a human being standpoint, like to compare that to a football injury or anything, like those are two totally different things. Like it is a traumatic experience to potentially watch someone dying in front of you, and then the audience might get feedback from the commentating crew that he's in stable condition, but those players likely don't know until they go into the half. So when those guys were talking about that situation, I was just like, and nothing against them. They do a great job, but like I was a little bit stunned with the lack of awareness about, like, I don't know if you've ever seen a seizure or anybody else in the chat has, but like when you see something like that, especially in their mind, it's a father figure. I don't really understand how you can expect 19, 20, 21-year-olds to witness something like that they probably haven't ever seen and expect them to be locked in to the game. Because honestly, they don't care. They don't care about the game. So, they care about the game, but they care more about what happened.
And they should. So there's a lot to unpack there. So you did a nice job of taking that on from a number of viewpoints, because like you say, when we see an injury on the football field, even though it's not a good thing, there's really only two types of injuries that I can think of that really shock us, take us back, even as viewers, to kind of reassess and think about the importance of life and our physical bodies and the functioning of them versus a game on the field. And one would be the obvious, like neck, concussion, head injuries that could affect either the brain or affect the spinal column, possible paralysis, those kind of injuries that we've seen where the stretcher comes out and we don't know how this is going to turn out for this individual from the standpoint of either a concussion or some type of paralysis. And then the other one being more from the standpoint of the most gruesome one I can think of offhand that's recent is the Alex Smith, where he got his knee shattered in the NFL. And just, you know, when you see it and you know that this is a season-threatening, season-ending, career-threatening, just something that could affect them for the rest of their lives. So those are rare. What we generally see is we know, okay, it's not good, but, you know, somebody hurt their shoulder, they hurt a knee, they hurt an ankle, you know, they're limping, they're, you know, it's something within, what you would expect in a football game versus, as you state, this could be life or death. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's, you know, we could clearly see that guy, you know, sprained his ankle because he got tackled and he's twisted his ankle versus, just a person collapsing on the sideline. That's really serious, potentially life-threatening type stuff. And I got to remind myself, as you did, that my ability to cope with certain things, because I've seen things, I've raised kids, not that it's easy at my age versus, you know, an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old. And they're not just going back to work. Like if we're in an office situation, somebody has a seizure, they're taken out, and everybody
in the middle of a presentation.
And even then, in the places that I've worked, and most recently working for a Disney company, except for us having to get TV on the air, except for those people that had to be in a production studio working on that TV show because it's live on the air, there was always a lot of leniency given to everybody else having to deal with that, talk about it, get away from the work area, go home if they were expendable, all those things. There was a lot of understanding, as opposed, and even if you stayed at work, you know, kind of tempering what you had to do versus, you know, again, processing that. But their job for the day is very intense, focused, maximum effort, maximum mental attention given to their assignment and blocking and tackling, and it's very intense. And so to get back to that is, I don't think any of us can totally relate to that.
No, I obviously agree. It's tough. It was just interesting to hear those guys kind of give their explanation on it, and I think maybe they were trying to look through it from a football lens, and it was not. So, but anyway, normally they do a really good job. They did a good job the rest of the episode. So no hate towards those guys. I listen to every episode. So
but anyway, cut them loose tomorrow or anything.
What?
So I shouldn't cut them loose tomorrow or anything?
No, you should cut them loose. I mean, you live and you learn. So it is what it is. We're all human. It's interesting to hear other people's perspective. I was just giving mine. So, but lastly here, and then I'll let you go. I came up with kind of an interesting scenario that I think could actually happen. So the scenario I had in just a general opinion. Now we can, this is between the Big Ten and the SEC in the playoffs. This doesn't have anything to do with the Pac-12 or other conferences, which I know there's probably going to be a team from another conference that gets in. But I wanted to get your thoughts on, so Alabama's playing Tennessee, obviously. If Alabama plays Tennessee and loses, but it's a competitive game and they don't have Bryce Young, okay? If Alabama which we're expected that Bryce Young will return. If they go on to win their division and they play in a conference, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not familiar with the divisions in the SEC. Is Tennessee and Alabama in the same?
No.
Okay, so no. Okay, so if Alabama were to go on and win the rest of their games, Bryce Young comes back.
Yeah.
Georgia wins out.
Yeah.
Georgia and Bama play in the conference championship. Alabama loses a close game, or let's just say competitive game to Tennessee or to Georgia, but they have a healthy Bryce Young. So Alabama lost to Tennessee without Bryce Young. They lose to Georgia close with a healthy Bryce Young. Do you think there is a case for a 2-loss Alabama team, if other things play out accordingly in other conferences, to get in ahead of a 1-loss Michigan or Ohio State before the conference championship?
So that 1 loss, Ohio State or Michigan, is going to be the team
against each other. Yeah.
The game, and stays home. So you've got an Alabama team with 2 losses, and one has the conditions that you just put on it. They went to the conference championship game. They lost versus a team that didn't go to the conference championship game but only lost once.
Yes. Now, I think a portion of this would depend on where Georgia is ranked at the time, which I'm assuming if Georgia wins out, I don't see them being ranked lower than 2. So you're talking about Bama losing to likely a top 2 team in the conference championship.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Have you thought about that? That's just one thing I thought about. I was like, because I've always been racking my brain over the years about, could we see a 2-loss team get in? And to be honest, if you kind of think about it, I mean, it seems kind of neck and neck if that scenario plays out.
Oh, absolutely. That scenario has been played out or been served up to me, but without the condition of Bryce Young not playing, Bama losing close, and then Bama losing it. It's been more from the standpoint of another kind of 3-way situation in the SEC between Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia, where, Bama loses to Tennessee, therefore Tennessee loses to Georgia, therefore Georgia goes to the conference championship game. Tennessee's 11-1. Bama.
Do you think it would depend on Georgia versus Tennessee? Like if Tennessee is competitive in that game? Because I know you still have a quarterback out, but like it's almost like if Tennessee slightly is very competitive with Georgia, then you could always go back to, well, Alabama was competitive against Tennessee, but they didn't have their starting quarterback.
Well, yeah, if this scenario plays out, and it can play out in a number of different ways, but in similar fashion with these 3 teams involved in the SEC and those 2 teams involved in the Big Ten, of course, it's going to come down to the evaluation of how well these teams played and how close the games are. So they're going to have to be close games to have these teams be considered.
Yeah, and I guess we can assume that just in general because it makes it more interesting. Because I don't know about you, but I would love to put this stupid committee in between a rock and a hard place and just have it be.
Oh, I would too. I want chaos every year. Absolutely. That's what I want every year. Chaos. I want difficult decisions to tear down the credibility of the committee. And I don't have it out for them personally. I don't think they're idiots or that they're doing a bad job. I just think the whole system doesn't make any sense and this should not be the system.
Yeah.
So I just want to discredit the system. I don't think that they've done a horrible job, but anybody, I hear this phrase all the time and it drives me crazy and I jump on it immediately. Well, it's just going to work itself out. No, it's not going to work itself. Yeah, sometimes it can work itself out. Yes, but actually 2014, there's a debate that can be made. 2016, 2017, 2018, 2020. Those are all very debatable years that I'm not saying that they made the wrong decision, but I'm saying that because the system is so screwed up, there was one or two teams outside the playoff that had a resume and an argument just as strong as the fourth seed. So it doesn't just work itself out.
Yeah. Do you also think it becomes a little bit more complicated with home field advantage? So like if Ohio State loses to Michigan slightly,
yeah,
they were the home team. If Michigan slightly loses to Ohio State, well, they were the away team. So let's say a field goal,
yeah,
or something like that. I mean, I guess I'm just kind of getting like, who would you pick? Like, let's say I'll lay out the scenario. So Alabama loses to Tennessee within one possession.
Yeah.
Without Bryce Young.
Yeah.
They go on. Georgia beats Tennessee, we'll say within a touchdown, maybe 10 points.
Okay.
Alabama and Georgia play, and we'll say Alabama loses within one possession, but it's very competitive.
Yeah.
And then let's say Michigan loses to Ohio State within a possession. Assuming the other conferences allow this scenario like this to be a realistic scenario, and we can give one other team, let's say Clemson gets in, or the Pac-12 kind of beats itself up later on. But in your opinion, who would you pick? A one-loss, non-conference appearing team that played competitive against their conference champion, or a two-loss conference championship appearing SEC team that played competitive?
Well, the committee would never admit to this, but they already set a precedence that they took a one-loss non-conference champion in 2017, Alabama, over a two-loss Ohio State conference champion. So they did that. I would take the conference champion.
Or the divisional champion. So you would take.
Oh, wait a minute. Georgia beat Bama, correct?
Yes.
In your scenario.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
one appeared in the conference championship game. One did not.
Yeah.
But the one who appeared in the conference championship game has one more loss than the other. But the team the Alabama appeared, that they didn't have their starting quarterback in the other loss.
Yeah.
The additional loss.
So that's all so razor close. I would kind of blow that stuff out as being generally equal, and I would start ranking overall resumes and dominance against that schedule.
Which would put Michigan as a disadvantage because their non-conference schedule is trash.
Yeah, I'd be going with strength of schedule and the game control against that schedule.
Yeah.
Strength of record.
Honestly, I think I agree, and partially because I think I agree is I really like, as much of a Michigan fan as I am, I really would love to see the committee have a headache. And I don't know about you, but I'm a fan of history making. And if Michigan doesn't get into the playoffs, they're going to the Rose Bowl, and this would be the last Rose Bowl likely.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be okay with seeing that spectacle. Hopefully, going
in person.
Yeah, well, me and every Michigan fan.
Okay. I know he said that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know. It's a special thing, and it's gonna go away. But I actually would agree, and I think it would be awesome, honestly. I just would like to see that first two-loss team get in, because here's the other thing too. What if they win it all? Which they could with Bryce Young. You have that chance, and then you're even making that exponentially more interesting, which, I mean, when you're talking about sport promotion, that's kind of what you want. So,
well, the committee kind of covered all of its possible issues or challenges a few years ago when, you saw a progression starting with the first year where they said, well, conference championships mean everything. And that's why Ohio State's in and TCU and Baylor split a conference. So we're conference championships it's a pillar of what and then it kind of like every year something else happened to where they had to say, okay, well, now this is factoring in or that's factoring in. So where a few years ago they got to the point where they just said, well, we select the 4 best teams. So
yeah. Well, and especially if you're going by that criteria, you obviously would put, you can always fall back on it. Like, I mean, Alabama, I'm pretty sure most people would agree that Alabama with Bryce Young would beat Michigan. So, I mean, or is the better team. So you still kind of that, I don't want to say falling on their sword, but it just would be hilarious to me to see the committee put in a 2-loss team over a 1-loss team. As much of a Michigan fan as I am, I just think that if that scenario played out, it would just cause so much chaos. It would just be funny to see the reactions.
Well, I guess the one example of that would have been in 2017. So even though a 2-loss team has never made the playoff, we do know that a 2-loss team would have made the playoff. Auburn lost the SEC championship game. They had 2 losses. They would have been in the playoff.
I forgot about
had they won the SEC championship game. They had just beaten 2 number 1 teams that month.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that's true. That's true. That would have been interesting. But all right, Mark, I appreciate the time. I'll let you go. Thanks for your
I appreciate you calling. Thanks.
Bye.
All right. And we appreciate everybody being here at the Voice of College Football. Again, we've got a full slate of live streams on Wednesday. It starts with Oklahoma Live at 12:30 Eastern on the Oklahoma channel. Michigan at 5, the aforementioned Michigan live show at 5 Eastern. Florida State at 6, Miami at 7. So that's the lineup for tomorrow, plus tons of content. I'm going to be delivering power rankings for the rest of the conferences. And then also, I hope to get to a Penn State, Michigan preview and an Alabama, Tennessee preview at the very least right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you being here. Remember the Amazon link and please subscribe if you haven't already and get to some of the channels that we have yet to get to 1,000 subs. Some of those are key. West Virginia, let's hit on that one next. Appreciate you being here, and we will see you on Wednesday.